So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, is on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increased the power of Hamas. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
Netanyahu maintains the Qatar money was to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe. Having helped to build up Hamas, Netanyahu has now vowed to destroy it.
He fed the beast, and it exploded in our face. If you base your national security strategy solely on force, then you need to win 24/7 forever.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Thursday, March 28th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Unfortunately, I have to tell you right out of the gate, in case you sense it on my presentation today, that I'm pretty frustrated because I had an entire show planned today with a lot of extra work put in over the last probably 3 to 4 days of other topics that I wanted to cover. I had a whole medical freedom discussion of some of the updates on what's going on on different vaccination angles, on nanotechnology. I had a whole bunch. And just, I guess, one of those days, just randomly broke, everything stopped. Both browsers actually crashed. You know, it doesn't even matter, I guess. What's not even worth wasting your time with. But all of that was lost. One of those glitches, I guess. So I just decided to try to cover what I thought was the easiest to put together today, because unfortunately I was this close to just closing it and going home and putting it off till tomorrow, because it's really difficult for me to try to manage that. It's just, I'm frustrated in general, but also because I feel like I wanted to reproduce all the work that I put together. But what was the easiest to put together today? Well, demonstrating what's going on in Israel. So we're going to continue to go over, which we have been anyway, all of the, pretty much over the last couple of days, the continuation of the things we've been discussing, the conversation around the ongoing famine, the conversation around the recent developments from the United Nations side around the genocide from Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur, and the childish screaming arguments from the other side of this that want you to pretend that she's just Hamas now. And that's a logical argument that, oh, she just is covering for Hamas, because that just makes sense, as opposed to the fact that legally, by every metric we can possibly show, by every piece of evidence we can present, by every single organization and every human rights group and all of them are saying the same thing, but I guess she's just Hamas. And the fact that anybody, and it's not even to say that we should blindly trust her, or that it's just simply that anybody that is actually standing by these kind of arguments it's unbelievable to me, and it's revealing. And it's like I keep saying, remember who these people are. The absurdity, and I don't even mean just the people that are, you know, there's different sides to this that are covering the genocide. There's just no excuse for that, as if there's excuses for all the rest of this. But that's just something uniquely evil that we're watching people expose, that they are aware of this and not only acknowledging it, ignoring it, or normalizing it, or, you know, making what's the word I'm looking for? Justifying it. Not only justifying it, but acting like it's not even there. Acting like there is no famine, or there is no genocide. There's no war crimes being committed. It's all Hamas and Palestinians. And if it really pushed, it's because it's just how bad those Palestinians are. And we all know that. But no, it's only Hamas. It's only, as Rabbi Shmuley with his drowning in his own, I mean, I almost don't even want to get into that. I won't focus on that, because this guy's a cartoon. And it now is even being called out by people in the Jewish community, even Zionists, because they're making them look bad, or he's making them look bad, because the guy is ridiculous. And the whole thing is that they're coming out with these over-the-top arguments and pinpoint targeting. And I've been saying that this whole time because there was an argument made like that more than once in the beginning. But to see that over the last week, to have somebody like that make an argument in an aggressive, screaming, shouting you down kind of way to say that Israel is pinpoint targeting exact locations of only Hamas. I mean, not even their arguments make that case. It just shows you how lost this is today. So I'm going to go over some of the things I think are important, but I want you to know that there's a lot that needs to be covered. And I hope you will check out a lot of other independent media out there that is doing amazing work around a lot of the different things, in particular in regard to what is continuing to develop on the side of medical freedom, the Great Reset, WHO treaties. These are all bull rushing forward right now. I mean, in an aggressive speed. We need to be talking about this stuff. But let's get into what we're going to discuss today, because I really think, and I still stand by this, that this is easily the biggest thing we've ever covered. And I think, I don't mean that in the sense of that there's not situations where there are more deaths, I mean, because there clearly are, or that there are other situations that we might even argue, and that I could even make an argument are more important to our lives immediately. Oh, there's lots of ways you could frame this. Why I think this story is so important is not just because of how horrifying it is. In real time, social media broadcast, absolute murder, genocide. I mean, it's right on the surface. It's because of how it connects with everything else around the world in so many interesting and horrifying ways, whether we're talking about Zionism in particular, which is really the crux of the issue, or what happened before the elite state of Israel and what built that and what the agendas were around it, and going even further into the understanding of what the state of Israel and the governments within that have continued to do, infiltrating other governments, using sexual blackmail. I mean, and the fact that we're even anybody balking at these conversations when they've been so thoroughly proven is amazing. And I can already, right in my mind, you can already hear anybody paying attention to this, what the argument would be right there. You know, instead of acknowledging that, well, we've proven that there's Mossad connections and CIA connections and Israeli government overlaps and all sorts of things. Well, that's not what they're talking about. They are going to say, you're talking about Jewish people. And they're going to say, the only reason you hate this because you secretly hate all these Jews. And that's it. Now, you could argue that. You're wrong. And we've been aggressive about this because you have to be, with how crazy this conversation is, that it's so transparently obvious that pretty much most people, and I am confident in saying that, in the conversation of pro-Palestine, fighting for self-determination, wanting, the good things in the world, actually, stopping ceasefire, not one-sided arguments about what one side should be doing to the other, but actually fighting for this, the vast majority of them are actively fighting for equality, or however you want to see that, for some kind of two-state solution, for not saying that we should go kill all the children because they're also occupiers. That is a narrative that's being placed on top of this conversation by people who are desperate to make you think those people are what Zionists are, and they know it in most cases. And I've gone over this in such depth on this show, showing you like one of the ones we just talked about, showing you one of the things that Israel is doing and has done all the way since the original Nakba, written by Haaretz, and the discussing the, I think it was Operation Kurdish in 1957-58, and discussing how from that point forward, they have actively, right to this day, maintained a special, basically a classified kind of setting, there's a different term they used, for all the documentation that relates to what they have done since the Nakba forward, in regard to crimes, rape, pillaging, murder, all of it. And literally outlining as a metric anything that demonstrates or shows or indicates or suggests, rather, that Israel is not the most moral army in the world, that Israel, the government, and the IDF have committed, X, Y, and Z. Why would you write that down if it's something you've never done? Or the point being, it's obvious that you can show the history of awareness, not just covering up actions done by rogue people or bad apples, but an awareness of what you are embodying, and just being aware of that, okay with that, and more so being actively carrying out propaganda over 75 years to convince the world that that's not what you are. In fact, it's what everybody else is about going after you. Not Jewish people, Zionists. And of course, this is why there's such a desperate effort to conflate the idea of Zionism and Judaism. And again, it's just clumsy, failed arguments. You could disagree all you want, and maybe we can just stay like that and say, okay, well, I think this and you think that, but it doesn't, because the argument becomes, oh, well, you actually secretly hate Jewish people, not this political organization that's running the Israeli government, not that, even though that's exactly what we're saying. It's impossible. And I really hope that there are people out there that, who are honest about this, but still confused by it. Standing in the middle somewhere going, I'm worried that maybe I don't want to be racist. The truth is, if you're even thinking like that, you're probably not. I don't believe in the idea of accidental racism. I think that's absurd. The idea that you could somehow, say the wrong thing. No, what you're doing there is inadvertently saying something they've decided they're insulted by or offended by, even if they truly think it's offensive, even if it really is by most standards. Intent is what truly matters, guys. And this game we played where we turn this into, you can accidentally do the wrong symbol or wear the wrong clothes and all of a sudden you're a racist anti-Semite. No, the racist anti-Semites are the ones that are murdering children because of their ethnicity, the ones that are starving entire populations because of who they are or who they claim their parents voted for. That is the problem. So, okay, I'm sorry. I'm obviously on a run here because I'm just angry and I want to take it out on something. But let's get into the show today, because all of this is breaking down in front of us. Back to the point I made to start, I really feel this is a world-changing moment. It doesn't mean good or bad, really. It's about how we kind of harness that change, but I do see it taking place. So I want to start with a couple of interesting points that I think are relevant to all of this. And this is one that I just found, really, honestly, a point that I was going to start putting this together like I had said it before, and I just kind of got overwhelmed with how much work that would have been. I wouldn't have been able to do the show today, but I wanted to include at least one point that I thought was interesting. This called Freedom Podcast is a new like a smaller platform on Twitter that it's doing good work in regard to, just questioning narratives. And it says National Records of Scotland continues to hide excess deaths. Now, we've talked about this a lot. The world is shockingly aware of how excess death is seemingly everywhere, perfectly correlated with vaccination status, but somehow we don't like to talk about that. Just like stupidly. It's one of those moments where you realize that there is a real problem at the highest levels of what we power, not democracy, but actual power that just won't let these things move. But that we all see it. And like Scotland was the example of how they literally were like, we're not going to look into the neonatal deaths that are the worst in the world or whatever it was at the time, really bad, because it's, vaccine hesitancy and so on, which is essentially their argument, and just put it away. Never answered why there were so many neonatal deaths, but, safety, right? Safety first, or vaccination first is what that truly means. What they're saying is by artificially inflating the expected death baseline, they are now hiding that. Which, why are we shocked by that? We shouldn't be. It says by more than 13% for week 12 of 2024. Now, this is where you get into this game they played. And by the way, I wish I was ahead of this, because somebody did reach out to me. I wish I remember who they were too, so I can give them credit for it, a long time ago, and said, hey, I already see what they're doing here. They're already trying to play this game with the, age stratified or age adjusted or whatever, which is not an invalid thing to do. But that is how you manipulate something when ultimately the all-cause mortality across all age, that is how it's always been. You take a general mortality range and you break it down and average it out, and 4 or 5, 6 year, they do this, they've known it forever. To suddenly go, oh no, but now post-COVID, here's the way it needs to work. Otherwise, it's all fake news. It's just childish. And even what I wonder why the doctors involved with this who know that stay quiet. And there are a lot of them, as we've come to find out over the years. They're just cowards. But, whatever reason. I mean, look, I'm not even going to say or. Quite frankly, I get that there are people that have things that put on the line. But the more and more, everybody, including what we're doing here, well, we're putting everything on the line too, just to be honest about the truth. But some people aren't, as interested in the truth as we are. But you can see very clearly that all they've done is kind of bent this line or under some new added point to claim, no, that's what it really should be based on X, Y, and Z. And it's an alteration from what it's been this whole time. Now, you could argue that it was been wrong this whole time, certainly. But then why, anyway, the point is all those are certainly possible, but the data continues to show that there's something awry. Like, just because Scotland wants to bend the line and say, well, it's not that bad. Well, what about all the other countries? What about all the other countries that have the exact same interesting problem it's correlated exactly with the vaccination that we don't like to talk about? Or everything else on top of that. It's never just one thing. Myocarditis and thrombosis and blood clots and everything that you could add to it. So I just think it's obvious that they're still hiding this. And that's one small point, which should be an entire 4-hour show of information about how bad that really is still. Now, and we will continue to follow up on the stuff that's going on there. But I just, everything in me tells me right now that we need to focus on stopping, whatever we can do to save lives. Now, that's injections too, mind you. But I think our work on that and everyone else's work has at least put out the information enough to where people are interested, they can inform themselves. I still argue right now there are a lot of people that may not fully understand the true depth of what's going on around the Zionist government. And I think that's why this is important. And every moment we can inform people about that is one more person in the path of what they're doing. That's how I see this. Now, I want to start with this. Ryan Razbani, I'm not familiar with his work, posted this. Meta has gone full Zionist attack. I just like that, full Zionist. Actually, here, I forgot about this. Hold on. I like this post because, the Zionists pretend like it's racist because they pretend Zionism is Judaism, and it's not. I put, you never go full Zionist, where that, like the movie, you never go full, the term. Because the point is, it's Zionist. It ultimately, as even Avi Shalom will tell you, which by the way, I should play. I haven't played that clip in a while. Zionism is racism. It is apartheid. It's what it is. It's historically and obviously and provably exactly that, based on their own words, their own actions, and everything they've ever done to create what they're currently doing. I don't need to play it. You guys have seen the clip from Avi many times. But the point is, that's why I was just saying, that's why I like he put full Zionist attack, is that on all pro-Palestinian accounts, which we shouldn't need to verify this. I mean, you obviously always verify due diligence. I mean, I shouldn't need to qualify this statement because we've already proven this to you. It's very transparent, and they're all actively telling you they're doing it. They just, like before, we're not censoring people, we're removing misinformation. Well, that means the same thing when you break down the fact that the misinformation actually is true. But this is Meta deleted 2+ million Palestinian-related content accounts. Meta claims it doesn't discriminate, or rather just content, against Palestinians, but refuses to share data on its censorship. Now, this is a widely reported story, and it's not that hard to see because Twitter is doing it too. And if you haven't seen that, if you're still Twitter's some bastion of free speech, you're truly not paying attention. It's overwhelmingly obvious. Now, I want to share this. I found this really interesting. Now, obviously, with this clip, the two things to consider is obviously this could be something somebody made up. That's always possible. And on top of that, it could just be, I guess that's really the one that seems to stand out the most. I mean, always question everything, always. But the reason I think this is interesting is because when you really watch this clip, and on top of it, because we know this is happening in Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, and the UK for that matter, that they're going door to door in some cases based on flagged posts, which is wild. And they always act like, no, just no customer service. We're here just to check up on you, make sure everything's okay. It doesn't matter how benign you try to make it. You are going to somebody's home as the authorities, as the power structure, and telling them that we want to just make sure, are you crazy? Are you extremist? Like, all you're really doing is showing them that they don't have free speech, that their speech has gotten them at least investigated. Well, then it's not free speech, is it? The bottom line is you're setting up. Well, I mean, you could argue technically that would be, but the point being is where that goes from there is you're now being cataloged because of your speech. And I still argue that then is not actually free speech when the government engages with it that way. But the reason I say at the end of the day, when you watch this, it seems like it does in the beginning. I'm like, this kind of seems like it's not real based on the plain clothes and the way they're responding about their ID. And maybe you'll feel the same way, but the way it ends, the way the license plate and stuff, you can look into the license plate. She gets them on camera. But either way, we know this is happening. So imagine a world where this continues to get worse based on trying to stop genocide. That's crazy.
Can we just move in front of the house so the dogs don't go crazy?
Sure we can, yeah.
I need you to identify yourself and let me take imagery of your IDs.
I'm not going to share my credentials on the phone.
So you said you were with the FBI?
That's correct.
And why won't you show me your credentials?
We did. I showed you my
I didn't take a look at them. I said, 1 second, I'll be right back. Are you going to show me your credentials or no?
Yeah, we did already. And we identified ourselves. So what we'd like to do
I didn't look at your credentials. Again, I didn't verify them. I told you to wait, and I went inside.
Okay, that's correct. What we'd like to do is just have a conversation with you about some social media posts that you've made. Would you be willing to talk to us today about that?
No, I would not. I would like you to later talk on with my lawyer.
Okay.
Do you have identification
cards?
cards? No. I'll get back to you.
Okay. All right.
Do you mind just having your attorney contact the FBI office in Oklahoma City?
What's the number? What are the names of the agents?
I'll Google it for you.
So you're refusing to identify yourselves.
No, we've already identified ourselves.
Again, I did not take a look.
Okay, so the phone number for the FBI in Oklahoma City is 405-290-7770.
Okay.
If you just call and give me your name, then we'll be able to get you in contact with us, and I'll be happy to speak with you.
And tell him that Facebook flagged me for posts.
Facebook gave us a couple screenshots of your accounts.
Okay. So we no longer live in a free country and we can't say what we want?
No, we totally do. That's why we're not here to arrest you or anything like that.
Well, you can't arrest me for freedom of speech. We live in America.
Correct.
Exactly. So it's kind of weird that you want to come talk to me about me exercising my freedom of speech.
We do this every day, all day long, talk to people.
Okay.
Really, it's just an effort to keep everybody safe, make sure that nobody has any ill will or bad intent or anything like that. And we've got no reason to believe necessarily that that's you, and that's why we just wanted to have a conversation.
So do you have a conversation with everybody on the neighborhood?
Do you have information with anybody else in the neighborhood?
I mean, all I've done is exercise my right as an American citizen on a public social media platform with my personal opinions. Correct? Okay. Most of the individuals, right, in America, especially older generation, right, have Facebook. Are you questioning all the citizens in America?
We certainly would if we had any sort of concerns.
Okay, so you have concerns about my personal opinions?
If you don't want to talk to us, then you can...
I'm definitely not going to have a talk with you.
Well, thank you for your time this morning, and feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, they're so-called FBI.
So right there, you could see the license plate, you know? So the reason I say that is because my gut would tell me that if this was pretend, that they wouldn't show the license plate, right? Because technically somebody could trace this back to whoever was doing this. So yeah, I mean, it's like the only thing that stood out in the beginning as kind of like odd was, I mean, again, you'd like to believe that authorities were very aware that if you ask for their identification, they have to show you, you know, and yet the way they responded with that, where it's like, we already did. Like at my first, I'm like, this isn't real. But then, you know, something tells me like I think we're more and more day by day getting more and more unaccountable, more and more lawless, rampant lawlessness that I still credit for George Galloway for putting that statement in my mind. I like that. Rampant lawlessness. And that is a problem. It continues to perpetuate, right? Other generations grow into that and they think that, well, literally generations still to this day are being born that have only lived in a world of constant war their entire lives. And just from a U.S. perspective, right? And so the idea is that they grow up thinking that's okay. They grow up thinking that this is the way the world operates, right? That why do you not see? I mean, well, you probably do. We probably see the same thing in Israel right now. The mindset that a lot of people are taught, they're right regardless because we're the right ones. God said, or in the U.S. mindset, well, we're the democracy. Well, yeah, sometimes we bend the rules, really break them everywhere all the time, but it's because we're doing it for the right reasons. It's just such a childish game. This is the kind of thing that the people, you know, the Pompeos and the Boltons and the what's his name that looks like an orc from Lord of the Rings. I forget his name. He hasn't been around in a while. That, you know, they tell you, well, when we do it, it's not illegal, right? It's the same thing that, you know, Nixon, when the president does it, it's not a crime. Like this is the way that they view the world. And it's amazing that we haven't put this together by now for some people anyway. And so might makes right. And that is the message that you're getting. And this is sad right here. You know, the overall point is that this is going to continue to get worse until we do something about it. And I never, ever mean violence. There's plenty that we can do. Now, I don't mean ever in the sense that there's never a time. I mean, in this context, the reality being is that from many different political perspectives, even some mostly nonviolent, the point is if you are attacked, if your family is being threatened, well, I don't know about you, but I will surely defend myself with violence. But that's not something I believe in. I don't believe violence is the actions that we should lean into. I think violence begets violence. I think that's an important thing to be very clear about to the world because these are people always trying to frame you as something that you're not. But this is only going to get worse. So one thing you should do is learn how you should respond, right? Understand their legal processes and the way that they manipulate you. Understand, quite frankly, that you should never even answer these questions or quite frankly, even answer the door until you have somebody there to defend you, a lawyer, somebody like that. Now, I don't know about you guys. I never answer my door unless I'm expecting somebody. People think that's so strange. Why would you do that? Why are you beholden? I don't answer my cell phone unless I'm expecting something. I think turned off, turned over, flipped on silent, which frankly, some people that work with me, that drives them crazy. But it's about being sane, right? I have to keep my mentality. I can't allow myself to get drawn into everything. If I kept my phone on all the time, I would never stop working. I need to break away from it, and that's important. We all need to start learning how to decouple ourselves from these things. But in this sense, my point is learn how, what you should do if you end up getting in front of them and they are asking you questions. I mean, my answer would be no comment. Talk to my lawyer. They'll always want you to think that means that's going to make you look guilty. They think you're guilty anyway. They look at you as if you're guilty from moment one. Go ahead, think I'm guilty. The point is, if they're going to do something about that, I would rather them talk to my lawyer about it. Right? That's just the way this should work. Now, one point on social media I think is really alarming today. I ultimately ended up getting into this, but this is Getter, and I was not using a VPN. Quite frankly, pretty much everything was off because I was dealing with whatever's going on with these browsers. All of them, by the way, no matter what I seem to use. But I got this from Getter today. Access denied. And it literally says, your request was blocked by our security service. What's going on, guys? So I was blocked personally, really my IP address was by Getter, at least for a few minutes. I've tried a few times. So who knows? Glitch. Always a glitch, isn't it? Maybe it is, maybe not. Who knows? Now, on the point about social media overlapping with surveillance and all of this, here's a post from knockla.com. LAPD is now using Israeli surveillance software, which Whitney has been screaming about for years. Her and I have talked about for years. It's everywhere. The Unit 8200 intelligence side of the Zionist government is everywhere in your face, and you don't even know it. 911 call centers. Carbine 911 is a company that's ran by, and one of the main points to understand is, again, as always, anything connected to Israel, somebody tries to make it about you being racist. It's not some kind of blood libel conspiracy theory. It's stating facts, which is Unit 8200 is an intelligence entity inside the Israeli government, and a lot of these overlaps from the intelligence world are directly correlated with Unit 8200 because this was a conscious and stated open push by the Israeli government to take over the tech sector. Now, that may not sound alarming, and maybe it's not. It is when you realize that we're talking about an intelligence overlap, right? And that has stated publicly that they act wherever they are in the world in the interests of Israel, which even then probably shouldn't. You could say that's just what every government does. Fine. Then you shouldn't let these governments acting in the interest of a foreign country control processes, technological connections, 911 call centers, medical connections, ambulance centers from companies that are, I lost my thread on what I was saying. The point is that you shouldn't let companies that are working for or in the interest of a foreign government control these things in the United States, whether they're German, whether they're Britain, whether anything. So the point is, all that being said, the facts are clear. In Israel, Whitney's been breaking this down about Israel for a very long time. Unit 8200 overlaps are peppered across this country in medical aspects, 911 call centers, surveillance. And I don't know why that doesn't alarm anybody. Now, let's just say you don't think it's ever been misused. Your government misuses things against you. Why wouldn't a foreign government? And then we find out and have known forever that this has been doing. I mean, how about just going back to Trump's administration? They caught spy devices on the White House from Israel. This is crazy to me. Now, this is a local LAPD at Los Angeles using Israeli surveillance software that it goes on to say that can track your phone and social media. So we're worried about TikTok that's technically not even owned by, the game about what's Chinese and what's not. And overall, it's a company that is, even by Jonathan Greenblatt's statement, is not really about China and influence. It's about the fact that young kids on TikTok just see what's going on and they have to change that. He stated this publicly, or rather it became public and it was on the record now. But we're not worried about this. Why not? Oh, because Israel's not the problem. It's just crazy to me what we will choose to ignore. And again, I say that from a government perspective. I think most people are seeing this right now. And here's a Florida town installing live facial recognition to protect against 3 trespassers. Now, of course, you could argue that this isn't the same company, and I don't think it is. But either way, the idea is that this is Florida, so a Republican state, DeSantis and all of that, putting in live facial recognition software because, trespassers, any of those conversations. Well, that's not a problem now because it's about the bad boogeyman coming down. Well, okay, isn't this the same concept as, and by the way, I don't mean every Republican. That's never the case. I mean the people lost in the most extreme paradigm sides where no facts truly matter as long as you're shilling for one side or the other, the left-right paradigm. The majority of people, I think, operate somewhere in the middle there, is that they're literally putting this stuff in. What happened to the Great Reset? What happened to everyone screaming about WHO, Great Reset, technocracy, and all that? Well, suddenly immigrants, now it doesn't matter. Or whatever the narrative is about the bad things happening in your town, whether it's because of, any number of overlapping dynamics. I think the real one that stands out right now is the idea of whatever people continue to pretend is coming from the southern border. Remember when, moments ago, that was like the hair on fire conversation. No one's even talking about it right now. I just find it so insultingly obvious. Doesn't mean it's not important. I've always said that it was. I just think it's interesting how people who are tapped into whatever that is, right? Whatever left-wing platform that's super tapped into the top, or whatever right-wing platform, like an Alex Jones kind of a thing, where they just go along with what's said. They get statements get made about World War III, and then it just doesn't happen, and we just move back and take the next one. Here's the next dangly thing you should freak out about with no evidence, and then we move on. Sometimes it works out. Hey, Alex was right, or got lucky, or said the same thing we've all been saying, and sometimes it works out, or maybe just was. Overall, how do we not see how often they say things that are so flimsy, so completely baseless? Or let's all get distracted by his screaming match with Rabbi Shmuley because that's important, right? But here's an important one. If you're curious what the anti-Semitism hate speech laws are being passed through legislation by Republicans are, here's the list. And guess what? It's the exact same definitions as being used by Abbott, Trump, DeSantis, Youngkin, Kemp, Huckabee, Sanders, more. Oh, yeah, to the left and right, they all agree that they'll censor you because you say things about Israel. Does that even need comment? Nick here said something interesting that I just think I want to point out. He said over the last few days, anyone that said Christ is king fell for the trap and are now on the list of anti-Semitism. Now, it's funny. I've wanted to remind me to point out this whole thing I thought was interesting. But, are we really still in this mindset? This is like talking about robots and drones when we're in like nanotechnology smart dust time. And we really are, guys. We've been there for a decade. That's why I don't think it's getting talked about. What I think is hilarious is that we're still in this mindset that like, oh, they got a list and they waited for you to say it. And they're like, oh, mark down Ryan. He thinks this and he's an anti-Semite. Like, I'm not trying to make fun of this person. It's that like most people don't realize this. But this is this archaic mindset. Like, you think that they need you to say it. If you are they're listening to you with your Wi-Fi router. They're listening to you. And again, if you think this isn't real, it's a provable reality that they're demonstrating on public stages, the World Economic Forum, and that have been used forever. Or the idea that they're using your phones. This stuff is public. So why would they need to trick you into saying Christ is king when they can just literally watch what you say online or what you say anywhere all the time? This is the mindset that it's all a trap because they're going to catalog what you're doing. Sort of like with the cannabis laws. Remember what they said? Oh, they're just going to make sure they watch who smokes cannabis, and you're all going to go to jail. No, it didn't happen because that's ridiculous, and it's not how this works. They already knew before that who was smoking cannabis, guys. So my point here is just to recognize that we're light years away, past the idea of this kind of like clunky, archaic mindset we have. Computers and robots, guys. We're so far past that with the technology they're using. And, people disagree with that. I think we can prove it. I just don't think it's in wide use in the sense of what we see in our lives, but I 100% believe that it's being used to spy, to influence, to assassinate. I really believe that. But the point on this is about left and right, both sides of the illusion, continuing to push the idea that you're a bad person if you criticize Israel, even if you didn't say anything bad, because wink, wink, anything Israel is anti-Semitic. And that's how this is going. And it's amazing to me. Again, meanwhile, both left and right are actively using that same government surveillance software and 911 call centers and medical overlap to, that can also steal your information from your phone for whatever reason. And that's no big deal because it's Israel, right? I just think that's ridiculous. But on the point of Christ is king, I think this is interesting. I just want to point this out. This is this whole back and forth thing where, I don't know whether you believe Candace Owens is suddenly independent or this is all some manufactured thing to pump out yet another new ma'am. Right? Look at the mainstream alternative media. They're all super independent and really all have direct ties back to everything we should be concerned about. I'm not saying I know that. Quite frankly, of all of them, Candace says a lot of stuff that I tend to agree with, but I also think a lot she says is ridiculous. But that's my opinion. And I think it's what comes from the two-party paradigm, quite frankly. But The whole break off with her, which by the way took forever. Why Ben Shapiro stayed with her with his company while they were like at odds with everything they were saying until now. I don't know. It could be organic. But what's the big push that we keep seeing is this whole weird divide where like Nick Fuentes on the Hot Spaces was saying, you'll only hire people who are on this side of it and they'll only hire people pro-Israel. And and it's just like, what does it really show you? Why are either of them only hiring people based on their religious beliefs? Isn't that stupid? Yeah, it's not. It's completely counterintuitive to journalism, guys. You have to understand this. I'm a Christian. We have to realize that the reason that I've always maintained the idea that there's no place for my religion in your work of journalism is because religion is based on faith. The exact opposite of what we should be doing in journalism. Facts. Now, you can argue that you believe that it's a fact that God existed and Jesus existed and whatever else you want to talk about. But that's still what you believe based on your faith, right? There's people could disagree at the very least that there's not proof, that we simply have our, historical documents and so on. The bottom line is when it comes to what you believe and how you act on that going forward, that's faith, not proof, not facts. And so when that suddenly becomes an overlap to how you view your coverage of the journalism, and that becomes, now that's personal, right, on one side of it, but when it becomes something that's discussed in your engagement with the things you're reporting, that to me shows a gap where suddenly your faith is in some ways going to circumvent what I would argue is a fact. I mean, how do we not see that? So my point here is interesting is what she's saying, this guy is saying is, I guess, Daily Wire. And by the way, don't you always love when they make themselves the news, when this whole story, which is about what they are and what they're fighting about. And meanwhile, we're talking about a genocide. This is what they're talking about. But it says why Christ is king can be anti-Semitic. I mean, how stupid is this? So all it comes down to is both sides seemingly only choosing to, like, you could argue that you only want to work with someone who believes in Christ as like a Christian perspective, and that's your prerogative. But I quite frankly think that's ridiculous because you're only boxing off your perspectives. I would love to work with any other religions, nationalities, because it gives them a certain perspective that I may not have. But I would only, this is what we should care about, work with people who are objective, who are honest, who are critical thinkers, and who would never allow religion or any other personal dynamic to influence their fact-based writing. Isn't that amazing how this, and I'm not even saying any of this is directed at Candace Owens. I haven't even really fully gone through all of these conversations because I don't think it's important. It's not about her. I'll reiterate, I think of all of them, she's some of the person I think has, what I take to be some of the most honest takes. But the overall point is how this divide is taking place. And it's almost perfectly timed to be like Jewish versus Israel or Christian or Christ is king versus Israel first or whatever the game is that's being played here. I find it really odd. Now, on one more point about two-party illusion stuff, Ron Flipkowski says, I'm sure the algorithm in September, October will be just fine. And but his point is that he doesn't think Elon Musk is going to be honest about this during the election. But it says, Elon Musk tweeted, I voted 100% Democrat until a few years ago. Now, I think we need a red wave or America's toast. And I just sighed when I read that. I said, back and forth, the teeter-totter goes. Why do we keep falling for the same trick over and over and over and over and over? Maybe we're not. Maybe everybody's agreeing with me, but we all think nobody else is listening. I mean, who knows the truth? Overall, it's mind-blowing to me why we continue to play this game. And I'm not even saying you have to believe me that in the provable fact that your voting has no effect on the outcome. But at the very least, recognize this two-party game. Again, it's so provably clear. The largest voting block every election are people that don't partake in the election. And then the largest voting block within the ones that do are almost always independent. And yet we still pretend like left, right's all that matters. Or at least that's what they say, and nobody balks at that. Like, it's because the people invested, whether through either identity or through financial or through whatever else, career, invested in the status quo of left, right, RNC, DNC, and all the money and everything that flows through, want that to stay the way it is. And then we'll give you narratives from one side or left, or one side or the other, the left-right paradigm, in order to keep you thinking that they want to change it too, but here's why it's okay right now. Keeping you passive. Just wait. Trust the plan. It'll all work out. Frustrating. I know you guys see it. Now here's biometric ID back on that point to finish the segment. On top of all of that, here's EU digital wallet framework finally adopted for digital ID paradigm shift. That was 3 days ago. Oh, 2 days, excuse me, 26th. I mean, it's just all rolling forward. It seems like most everybody's pushed back on this. Even what New York School of Law, I think, called this a paving the road to hell. Like, even mainstream groups are not pulling punches. But, this is what we're seeing both with the Israel conversation and a lot of other things, is we're not really bound or ruled by what we think we are. That's very clear. There's power structures that are simply beholden to something else because nothing ever seems to stop, even though the vast majority, even the countries, want it to. We need to recognize that. Now, lastly, on this point, I just thought this was wild. And this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing now more and more. Now, there have been a lot of these fakes that went around like that. There was like, what was it? Boston, whatever, that made fun of it. Boston Dynamics is the actual company that was like Boston Dynamics or something like that. And a lot of people fell for it because it looked real and made it look real dangerous. But these, as far as I can tell, are definitely real. And what it says is testing Limex Dynamics autonomous bipod robot in the wild. I'm just showing it. I mean, am I crazy? Or is, like, without any other, just as the video itself, without any sound, any comment, this is crazy to me. This is scary. I don't understand why we think we even need this in the context that's being put forward. As I simply said, I honestly don't understand why this isn't alarming to everybody. Now, even if you think obviously you could find a purpose for this, but it's really about what we already know. And I mean, literally everybody, even those that want to pretend that that's not probably true because I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. We all know, truly, if we're honest with ourselves, that these are already, if not actually first, being fitted with weapons. Anybody disagree with that? I think we all know that. Every single thing ever in history that has been a new development or movable or has been loaded with weapons. Just let's see how it works. Or usually, again, the first thing that they do. Or lethal or non-lethal. So just in case you're out there protesting for the wrong thing, they can come out and non-lethally, which pretty much always means it can also be lethal, come after you. And I said, all for your safety, of course. It's as if we haven't learned from our own history or, every dystopian movie ever made. Well, there's no reason to just not do something that might be beneficial, but I just think especially at a time where we're watching who the power structures are. Like the leading power structures in the world right now are pretty clearly wildly crazy. Completely out of their minds, like willing to literally murder people in front of them while they know you're watching and telling you something else is happening. And they're building robots like this. Like, we're not going to talk about that in the context of how that will clearly be played out in world stages or foreign governments or using them for, God only knows. I just think this is a crazy reality. And I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just think we need to be aware of how much this is happening. And all of a sudden they just roll them out. What are we going to say? Do we vote for these things? And it's just like, and again, maybe it's 10 years from now, 20, maybe it's tomorrow. I just think that's an important thing to realize. Now, let's get into some of the other points for the news conversations of what's going on around the world. One, I wanted to follow up on the Crocus City Hall attack in Moscow, or close to. And this is a new article from Telesur. Russia finds link between Moscow terrorist attack and Ukraine. Now, what's weird is there's been back and forths about this, about whether Russia argued that ISIS was behind this. Now, I heard some statements that they had argued that it ultimately, after all the back and forth, it looks like it was ISIS. I never actually saw that. But even if they did, I think what's important is they've always maintained that there's clear evidence that this was whoever they claim it was, ISIL, ISIL-K, Mossad, that ultimately Ukraine was still involved. Now, my point was ultimately that we covered this on both shows. This was the 22nd when it happened, and the next day on the 23rd. And it was all evidence points to U.S., Israel, Ukraine behind Crocus City Hall shooting. And then, of course, I asked, does ISIS-K even exist? Because there's a valid question about whether this is just a simple a catch-all for anybody claiming something that they want to lump at some group that they can then claim as Iran, which is, by the way, also what's happening from Israel's side everywhere. Everything ultimately is Iran, even if that's not provable, even if it's not the truth, because that's their agenda. But the evidence, not proof, because people still have a hard time with that, I guess, because evidence is not proof. Evidence can be falsified. Evidence are data points. But all the evidence we have points to the likelihood being some overlap. And my point was that all of them are involved with creating any of these things, whatever angle you think is responsible, whether it's ISIS, ISIS-K, Ukraine, CIA, Mossad. The point is, in every one of those angles, you could draw direct lines between all of them. So it's very clear that they're complicit, in my opinion, based on anything that happened here within the range of narratives that we think are possible. but not proven. So that's not saying we know for sure. But here's what they said as of today, that the chairman of the Russian investigative committee, which again, you could consider that they could be lying like any other circumstance, but you shouldn't be thinking more so than any other government. They're all capable, all of them. That's the crazy thing, is that we would make these decisions that when Russia says it, all assume it's a lie and go forward. When U.S. says it, all assume it's true and go forward. No, that's ridiculous. It should be that they're all 50-50. Take it at face value, consider what they're saying, do your research, and decide after the fact. Who is saying it really should be ultimately benign. It's about whether you can prove it or not, right? I mean, it matters. It's a factor at some point when it comes down to like a decision making, just, on the line. But ultimately, it should be about the facts and what you can prove. And what we have so far very clearly points to a Ukraine-specific CIA overlap, but I definitely think there's an Israeli involvement here based on all of the different things we've seen. But it says chairman of the Russian investigative committee said that he has now new evidence connecting the concert hall terrorists with Ukraine, and not just Ukraine specifically as a broad concept, but the neo-Nazi militias, which is exactly what we thought. It says after analyzing the technical devices seized from the detained, Russian investigation teams found evidence of financial transactions that connect the material authors of the attack with the Ukrainian nationalists. Right sector, Svoboda, Azov movement, which, by the way, are all directly tied back to Israel and the CIA. I've shown you many times. 2018, this is just one article. I can prove to you that they're directly tied in with funding and arming and working with these neo-Nazis, which, if that's confusing to you, then you need to do some research. As it said, the point is that the Azov militia was what they were funding, and the human rights groups were saying, how are you arming neo-Nazis? It makes my head hurt. And they didn't stop doing it because they didn't care. Or the fact that we've talked about the, Operation Aerodynamic and the funding going all the way back for decades. But the point, arming these neo-Nazis. And now it's important to realize is that at every circumstance you can look back in, like whether it's the Syria conversation or any of these, when Russia comes out and says this, and maybe I could be wrong, maybe they don't do it this time, but historically, they almost always later produce evidence. I know, crazy, right? Not just, trust me, shut up, you're a liar, you're racist. They come out with evidence. They produce it to the UN, and they usually try to block them from doing it under some random, it's just so clear. Now, of course, they could lie about that evidence, but it's very different than what we tend to get from national security, anonymous sources. Israel said, Russia, that's what we get today. So wait and see. If nothing comes forward, we question it like anything else. But if they do present evidence, then we should look at that evidence. And if we do have financial transactions you can prove, you should consider whether they falsified it, but realize that the evidence that they're presenting is all you ultimately have. So if you're then refusing the evidence you have and only going, but the U.S. and ISIS, and leaning on that instead of evidence, that's pretty ridiculous. But it says to prepare their terrorist act, the criminals received significant amounts of money and, interestingly, cryptocurrencies from abroad. And it says, quote, Ukraine had paid large amounts to the perpetrators. Another suspect involved, the terrorist financing scheme, has been identified and detained. I don't know if that means 12 people now or whether they've released some. It says Russians investigative committee said, as reported by Moscow Times. 8 other defendants in the ongoing terrorism probe have been remanded into custody by Moscow's district court. Now, here's what's hilarious to me in a gross way. The whole corporate media just dropped this story. Oh, ISIS did it. Game over, right? The butcher did it in the whatever. I can't even remember clue. It's like, just game over. That's it. Because ISIS said, you know what? See, damn it. I'm remembering something that I wanted to talk about. I had this whole segment put together. Damn it, that makes me mad about ISIS and the history around it. Because it was really good too. And I'll tell you just briefly, but I wanted to go through the actual BBC and all these different mainstream articles where they were going, should you trust ISIS? Well, that's a stupid question. Obviously not. But the point was, they make it clear in the article that ISIS in the past have claimed events that they weren't behind, that it will speak up way after the fact, just because they argue that it was influenced by something they said. So it just shows you that ultimately, because ISIS said is a really dumb reason to just say we know they're behind it, which is all we've gotten. Now, U.S. seems to claim the point I just made, that they have some kind of behind evidence that they can't show you. It means nothing. Those are words. That means there is no evidence until they actually present evidence. Them saying they have evidence is not evidence. That is just a statement. So they have ISIS said, and it's the only thing that's been presented. And yet we act like we know. Like, just recognize how irresponsible, juvenile, ridiculous that is, because we don't know. And especially since it's the like supposedly the chief enemy of the US, but now we'll just trust them. They know. It's just so crazy to me. And the bottom line is that ISIS-K, that is the group they're pointing at, I mean, from a lot of people's statements, it doesn't even exist the way they claim it does, that it basically vanished years ago, and now they just point to it as a catch-all. As I said before, India points to it and saying Pakistan's behind it. Pakistan says India's behind it. Israel says Iran's behind it. The U.S. It's just anything. And over the years, like San Bernardino and plenty of the situations, they just go, hey, ISIS-K. And San Bernardino was one of those examples where it ultimately turned out that they said they just support us, which they never said. So it ultimately means that they claimed this as ISIS-K because we claim that they were inspired by our words. And from the corporate media, that's ISIS-K behind it because narrative, because there's an agenda around it. But it says 8 other defendants' ongoing probe have been remanded to custody. In a hasty reaction to these discoveries, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby called the Russian Investigative Committee's statements meaningless propaganda. Why? Because he looked at their evidence? No, he just said, that's what I'm supposed to say. They said something that challenges what I said, so I'm going to say that's fake news. The thing you've never looked at, John Kirby? Yes, that's fake news. Got it. And he says, insisting that, quote, the Islamic State was solely responsible because we trust ISIS. That makes sense, right? That's it. The point is, the evidence probably will come out based on the history, but the evidence we already have, I think, is pretty obviously pointing in one direction. And I mean, everything, by the way, everything points in the opposite direction of any ISIS overlap other than the U.S. saying that, other than some Telegram thing they posted and said that's ISIS. Even though in the past, that article I was going to go over, it discusses very clearly how flimsy those Telegram channels are and how the Telegram channel versus the Al-Amaq news station aren't even the same thing and how one tends to go after the other and ultimately it's not clear. It's crazy and they know that. So when they just go, ISIS said because of that, they know that, which means everything tells me that they're doesn't mean it has to be something else, but it means that either they don't know and they want you to think it's ISIS-K based on nothing, which should be pretty suspicious. Now it says, ISIS bears full responsibility, says the United States, based on their statements. That's it. And then, interestingly, Kirby says he gave them a warning before the attack. Now, this is what I think is strange. Remember, I showed you that at the beginning, as we all did. Then he came out in a statement that morning and basically acted like he had no idea about this. Now he's coming back saying, we told you ahead of time. I think this is what it looks like to be lying about everything. As a result of work with the detained terrorists, the examination of the devices seized from them, and analysis of information of financial transactions, evidence of their connection to Ukraine nationalists has been obtained. Now, we talked about both these. I recommend you watch this. I think we did this one. I think is really important, actually. Breaking down all the information, I think is really clear. Connections to ISIS and the United States to the founding of Al-Qaeda to ISIS, right? The proof that they have worked with them, given the medical treatment. I mean, or the most important, which is hilarious, is when ISIS literally publicly, or whatever that is, right, said, we apologize, Israel, for attacking you in the Golan Heights. Literally happened. Even the Times of Israel pointed it out. And yet we're supposed to pretend that that's their main enemy? And that alternatively and simultaneously that Iran is the leading sponsor of terrorism and works with ISIS, except, oops, ISIS attacked them. I mean, it's just, this whole thing's falling apart because people who have brains are just paying attention. Right before that, the people that have brains are the ones screaming on our side of it going, you're lying, here's the facts. And then you got this whole grouping of mindless two-party paradigm followers. Suddenly, this whole thing has woken up all these people that are honest in many ways and just haven't looked, didn't know, and are suddenly going, oh my God, look at all these starving children. Oh my God, look at the history of Zionism. Oh my God, what have I been doing all this time? And they're freaking out about it. Now, let's go to just a couple of points in foreign policy. In case you hadn't seen this, I just don't want you to miss this. Again, this is something I wanted to go in depth as well, but just so I didn't forget to point it out so you see it. There's back and forth. There's a lot going on between Lebanon as well. Now, let's not forget that their most extremist side of their very extreme government, people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir are openly, explicitly saying they want a regional war, which nobody in the corporate media will tell you that because that's the last thing. They don't want you to know that they actively want war. All that does show you is that they don't actually care about civilian lives. Ruins their whole picture. But the point is that Lebanon is also occupied, guys. They have an occupied area that's part of Lebanese territory, which means they have the legal right to armed resistance. Doesn't mean they can bomb civilian areas. So if Lebanon is doing that, well, then we should call that out. But I don't know how much we can trust coming from the Israeli narrative, seeing as how they've been caught lying about damn near everything this whole time. So question everything, right? But consider the fact that they've been caught lying over and over and over, and that has to flavor what you think they're saying next. But question it all. Consider everything. The point is, Israel has dropped over 117 white phosphorus bombs on 36 villages in South Lebanon since October 7th. Now, just in case, let's see if it actually pops up. I forgot this is, new browser, actually. Let's see. Make sure I'm going so I don't spell it incorrectly. That there's at least two, I think, or maybe three. Here we go. From the Human Rights Watch in regard to Israel. And going back long before what we're talking about now. This is from October 12th, 2023. Israel white phosphorus used in Gaza, Lebanon. Then there's also one that goes back even further. Israel's rain of fire. Israel's unlawful use of white phosphorus in Gaza. It's just so staggering how these things can be repeatedly documented over the years, and then John Kirby and Matt Miller will act like how they're borderline insulted that you would even bring it up. It's disgusting, and I hope they go to prison for the things they're doing today. Deliberately targeting and burning our forests. That's the part, again, that's another thing I had on the list, that one of the big points about why they're arguing that even from a military perspective, one of the things they use it for is to destroy territory, to literally make territory uninhabitable. And what they're saying is they're aiming this at villages, forests, farmland, olive trees, poisoning their soil, animals, and water. And nobody seems to care about it, even though we know what's happening, even though we can prove that they've been doing it consistently for a very long time. And then Syria. So, pretty much the locations they're trying to drive into this war that the U.S. is just ignoring because they don't want that, at least like it appears that way. I think they recognize that they're going to lose everything if they keep allowing Israel to drive this. But Iranian Revolutionary Guard Colonel Wadi and 9 soldiers were killed as a result of Israeli bombing in Syria. This was on the 25th. Just not new. They bombed Syria because it's Tuesday. Nobody cares. There's no declaration of war. There's no legal justification. There's literally no legal reason in any imagination for them just to bomb anywhere in Syria when they want to. But they always do, and nobody except human rights groups ever peep about it. Not even the UN. They've had, but rarely. Maybe today it'll be different. Here's Dave DeCamp, and I think what's interesting about this is showing you that one of the things we keep talking about, see, look at that. Twitter is terrible. I'm pretty sure I'm following him. Yeah. They're aware. The Israeli government is very aware that they've not just losing, they've lost almost all their support in the world. And it's good because it's not about Israelis individually or Jews individually. It's about the Israeli government and how openly psychotic they are. It's very clear. And the point is that we keep telling you that they've lost. I wrote that in the first week of this. They've already lost the information war. And people like Elon Levy, who was fired, yet still seems to lie about food aid, we'll show you today, continues to act like the opposite's happening. I'll even show you a clip from Netanyahu saying, we've never had more support. Well, he's lying, and we know he's lying. And think what's showing you, what I'm going to show you next, demonstrates that they are aware of that, and for the first time are now trying to, using that admission to try to win pity points, I guess, or act like, you're on the wrong side of history because you're not supporting the Jewish people, even though we're not even talking about the Jewish people. We're talking about the Zionist Israeli government and trying to protect Jews from your maniacal actions. But my point here first is that what Dave shows is that a Gallup poll, which always polls are flimsy. Polls are rarely the full picture. But interestingly, to use these as comparative points, majority of Americans disapprove of Israel's military actions. Now, it says the poll from Gallup has found that the majority of Americans disapprove of what they're doing, which has killed over 32,000 Palestinians, including well over 13,000 children. And it says, obviously famine across the entire country. Asked if they approve or disapprove of Israel's military actions, 55% responded they disapproved. Only 36% said they approved. Disapproval of Israel has risen as Gallup asked the same question in the poll in 2023, which 50% approved. That's a huge shift. Now, favorability for Israel is strongest among Republicans, of course, which, by the way, is really interesting, isn't it? Because here we are, a part of the world where our government is telling us Republicans are racist. Republicans are white supremacists. They're the crazy ones. And yet they're the ones that overwhelmingly support Israel, who are, we're being told, are the ones fighting racism and fighting these things. Isn't it interesting to see how that just kind of, I talk about the teeter-totter of the two-party illusion. We watch it all the time. What we're watching Israel try to do is force that in a one-day momentary situation where we're just like, suddenly it's the Democrats are all the racists and it's now the Republicans. Well, how does that make sense to the average American person who believes in the two-party illusion and has been walking through this the whole time and is now going, but wait, I'm supposed to support Israel. And now they're telling me Republicans are the ones that are on their side. It's just so, it shows you that none of this is real. They're just shoehorning in their narratives and based on their perceptions or based on what they want you to perceive. That's my point about how the majority of people involved in the election or not are the people, the largest voting bloc are people that don't take part. That's the true majority. What they want you to think is it's always down the line. It's always partisan. It's not. COVID wasn't, and neither is this. And they've admitted that. So all these classically held control structures are falling apart in front of us. They're trying to patch back together. But just recognize how very clear that is. They know and now are admitting that they've lost support around the world. And what they're showing you is that in this moment, the Republican extreme side, not just all Republicans in that open middle I'm talking about, but the partisan screamers and the two-party illusion, they seem to be some of the most belligerently supporting of genocide right now. That's just simply what we're seeing. That's not to say that Republicans versus that. It's just the reality of what we're looking at. I actually think it's just because we're highlighting just as many, by the way, on the left that are just trying to play the balance and be quiet about it, but still supporting Israel, are all supporting this in a very large way. But what's interesting is you have these very loud, either Zionist Christians, which by the way is completely ridiculous to me, but based on what Zionists believe today in Israel, but overall the Zionists in general in the Republican side of this that believe they should be supporting this at all costs, like the Ben Shapiro's of the world, which should tell you something. But there's this poll. Now here is Naftali Bennett. He says, I see that Israel is being portrayed as a warmonger. Oh yeah, are you? About 50 years too late, bud. Seeking to fight with all our neighbors. Yeah, that's literally what Ben Gvir and Smotrich are openly saying. But he knows that. He knows a lot of us know that. He's just hoping that we all don't know that, the ones he's trying to get to, right? This is a desperate effort to try to use this to make you feel bad, to think that they're on the wrong side, to win over support. He says nothing could be further from the truth. Here are a few facts to consider. When Hamas delivered its October 7th surprise massacre, a surprise aside from all the foreknowledge, aside from multiple governments telling you it was coming, aside from multiple IDF members telling you they were practicing, aside from multiple people involved telling you they saw it coming the day of, on and on and on and on. But yeah, surprise, right, buddy? And he says, there were no territorial disputes between Israel and Hamas. Really? I mean, do I even need to say that? Like this is just they're trying to create history in front of you. Recreate. It's revisionist. It says Israel had vacated 100% of Gaza 18 years earlier. Literally nobody in any honest sense believes that. It's very clear. And again, one of the reasons they're going so hard against Francesca Albanese is because she's taken a moral stance on this. Whatever you think about her history, whatever else, what she's done here is taken the stance based on the facts, and she stood strong against it. And they hate that. So right now, we'll get into it. They're calling her Hamas and a Hamas supporter and a rape supporter, whatever thing they're doing to scare you away from the facts. And the point is, she said it's step. Every human rights group, every international body, all of the UN, everybody, because the truth has never faltered. It is an occupied territory, post-2005, before 2005. And as I showed you, you go back to their documents at the beginning, it's all occupied territory. I don't know why we even debate that. We know the history. Balfour Declaration, the whole damn thing, they took all of Palestine. The reason we focus on West Bank and Gaza is because that's where the two-state solution forward is supposed to kind of, much more than it is today, supposed to be. So again, most of the resistance for Palestine is okay with that. Just Israel's not. But my point is, no matter where you talk about this dynamic, they've always been illegally occupying. Always. So no territorial disputes. I mean, not even Israel agree with that, guys. The Israelis are the ones saying that we wanted the West Bank as they continue to take parts of the West Bank. So he's just wholesale lying. And this is the craziest part about it, is there's honest people out there that truly think they're fighting for the right side, or believe in Israel and their Christianity, whatever they think connects it to them. And they read stuff like this and they just go, but that's not true. Like, we know that's not true because we think otherwise. And so they're just losing people everywhere. Like when they attack Francesca Albanese. Somebody who is clearly standing by what we can prove, the law, her integrity, and come out and just be like, you're a rape-supporting maniac. All you're going to do, which is what they're doing, is get people who might otherwise support them because they're naive, don't know any better, who go, hold on, I know her. And what she's saying is true. So it's waking people up one by one. It's the opposite of what they're trying to do. But that's what else are they going to do? They are desperate. They've lost already. Now it says the massacre was out of the blue. Really? Again, not only did you have warnings, but it was not out of the blue because you were funding them, because you were driving them to be what you wanted them to be. Whether that is what happened today or not, or because of that, that's a debate to be had. But you have provably funded them. There's no way you could say this is out of the blue. It says following October 7th, Israel did not initiate any attack on Hezbollah. It was them who attacked us. Well, again, that is a legally protected act under the Fort Geneva Convention, international law, because you're occupying parts of Lebanon. Their whole argument falls apart when you just simply understand the basic facts of the entire situation. I'm not even talking about the origin of who was there, the history, even though we can get into that too. I'm just talking about the basic understanding of international law. That's why they don't want you to talk about it, because same things in Syria, same things in Afghanistan, same things in Iraq, same things in any country they're currently illegally occupying. They don't need a justification to pick up arms and fight against the military occupier, not civilians. That's the way they try to conflate this. Nobody honest is saying it's okay to kill civilians in any circumstance. This is just desperate. Israel's army is a citizen's army, which I don't even know what that means. Our boys and girls serve there. You can be a CEO, a teacher, a plumber. Okay, it's like any other military man. We get it. You can also have another job. We get it. All Israelis, left and right, understand that if we allow Hamas to survive this pogrom, which is interesting, by the way, because he means on October 7th. The reality is the pogrom has been every day since. But he goes, our worst enemies will realize that you can attack Israel, rape our daughters, just go right to the lies. That's all you can do is go to atrocity propaganda, burn our babies, another lie, atrocity propaganda. Only two were in this conversation. One was shot through the door, the other was killed afterward, and both of them could have been the IDF as far as I can tell. None of them were burned. None of them were decapitated. There wasn't 40 of them burned. There wasn't 15 on a clothesline. You guys are lying about all of this. And yet he still keeps spreading the lie because he hopes he's going to win over one person that gets shocked by that and get away with that. That would spell our doom. It says, despite the tsunami of false propaganda that you put forward, describing Israel as deliberately killing civilians, which everybody anywhere can prove, your own people are proudly saying they're doing that. Think about how wild that is to say that's not happening when your own army, which either you can't control or you don't care is doing this, is posting these on TikTok and Instagram and their Telegram channels, and they're praising it. Even the IDF had to admit 72 Virgins was a real channel posted by IDF members where they were torturing people. They were killing them. They were mutilating their bodies and laughing about it. But yeah, let's pretend like that's not the truth, right? That we're false propaganda describing all of those things that we can see perfectly with our eyes. He says, we're actually prosecuting one of the most careful wars ever recorded. I mean, they're actually saying this. I'm going to show you a New York Newsweek article in a minute that tries to push this argument. And all of it, the entire article is, well, Israel said how, and that's it. The IDF claimed or said that they didn't do this and they take every precaution. And there's 45 paragraphs about how, hey, when they said this and they said that. And the whole point is, how can you argue against what they said? Yeah, it's easy because they keep lying. But Newsweek didn't care. They just absolutely happily repeated everything they said, just like with the rape allegations, with no evidence to back it up because, well, how dare you? That was it. There are roughly 30 to 35,000 Gazans dead, if you believe Hamas reports, which, by the way, his military does. So I don't know why he pretends he doesn't know that, right? These are the things that drive me crazy. He knows this because he's inside the inner circle. Israeli intelligence has deemed Hamas-run health ministry death toll figures generally accurate. The IDF posted a similar thing saying they thought that they were, quote, reliable. Both of those things are real, and it's very easy to prove. I keep posting this. And yet, Naftali Bennett, a leader in this government, just lies about that. Or doesn't, tries to undermine it by making you think that's what he thinks. How do we not recognize how stupidly dishonest that is? And he goes, of which 15,000 of them are terrorists. Right. So you're going to go, we don't believe all these numbers, but half of them are terrorists. How does that even make sense? If you're telling us half of them are terrorists, I mean, I guess you could argue he just doesn't believe that any other Gazans have been killed, or Palestinians, really, because Gazans are something they're using to try to remove the word Palestinian from our conversation. But 15,000 Hamas members? Or now they're saying terrorists because they're slowly trying to fold in Palestinian Islamic Jihad. As I keep showing you, because when that finally needs to get played, they're going to tell you, well, Hamas is gone, but we have this one still. You know it's coming, and I'm gonna sadly say I told you so, because we already know it. We already see it happening, and that's going to be the excuse to keep going with what was never supposed to end: the ethnic cleansing and murder of all Palestinians. We need to stop it. But 15,000, where's one of them? Show me one. I'd like to see one example of what you claim is Hamas. What's their name? Where'd they grow up? What were they wearing when you caught them? What did they try to do? Were they shooting at you? It's funny how we only get narratives about things we're shooting. And then when we actually find evidence, it turns out, well, that was a kid with a bike. It turns out those were a bunch of hungry people starving, trying to get flour. Every single time. Imagine the mathematical likelihood of every single example they show you turning out to be somebody it's not, or lies about who actually shot. And we're supposed to stand back and believe that means the evidence is so overwhelming. You've killed 15,000 of them, and you all have body cams and cameras everywhere. None of that's shown. Yeah, it's obvious. It's just staggering. This is against an enemy, he says, whose fundamental strategy, as he tells us apparently, is to increase deaths of its own people in order to pressure Israel. Well, that's what you're saying. They're claiming otherwise. So why would we believe you about what they think when everything you keep saying is a lie? Now, overall, the argument he's really trying to conflate is that by fighting, which that means they know what we're going to do. How is that even an argument? So your argument is they know that we're genocidal, that they know that if they do this, we're going to murder people? That's actually what they're saying without saying it, which means it's their fault because they knew how we would respond. You've heard that many times. So your argument is because you commit genocide right out of the gate, that now their game is to use that to pressure you. But no, their game was to use legal acts of armed resistance, other than those that committed crimes in the context of that, which seemed to be very few, as we can see. All of that was about pressuring you to respond, not murder people. By you increasing deaths, you're using that to blame them for it. But nobody's buying that. You're bombing children, starving children, and going, Hamas did it. I mean, that's actually even what you're saying. It's not that they caused it. You're saying Hamas did it. Actually, in most cases, trying to clumsily argue they somehow have children taped to their legs with no evidence whatsoever, despite your provable example of, damn it, another one I just realized I don't have. So frustrating. Actually, hold on. There's one that, now, since I'm talking about it, I actually should have done this too. I didn't think about this in the moment. A lot of this I posted online. So let me go to my account real quick. This is so funny. This just happened to pop up, by the way. Do you not notice how all they keep doing is they keep showing you these same few people? By the way, most of them which are carefully and comfortably set up in Qatar, where Israel lets them stay, and the people that they gave billions of dollars. Not anybody else, Israel, which is proven. And why is it they're the ones that keep saying, we'll do this over and over and again and again? It's the same clip they keep showing. I don't even think it's more than one. They just keep, from the very beginning, they had him come on, step up, say the words. Okay, now we're going to pretend it's all about over and over. Well, the reality, even if you want to believe that from the real conversation, is that they're going to continue to fight for their freedom. They want it to be rape Israelis and slaughter them, things that didn't happen over and over again, even though this person is an asset of the Israeli government, based as far as I can tell. And make sure I just didn't forget. Oh, yeah. I want to see if I can find this really quickly. There was one about human shields that I think is very important, that I'm pretty sure I wasn't able to find again. And it was specifically just more evidence about how these are being used. Damn, maybe I didn't retweet it. So frustrating how this works. Wait, here it is. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. So just since I mentioned it, and I knew I could grab this really quickly, speaking of the idea of human shields, where we were coming from here, to increase the deaths of his own people, 15,000 terrorists, right? Let's realize that as they say that, and as their entire narrative hinges on the seeming illusion that nobody's proven that they are using human shields everywhere they are, even though every example they've pointed to has later been debunked as not even actually being what they said or being in the wrong location by human rights groups. Or like, for example, the one they just said was a grenade launcher. Well, they even were forced to admit, sorry, it was actually a bike. So they killed 2 children with a bike and a bag of flour. And that one crazy maniac, what's his name? Naftali Bennett? Or no, it was Hananya Bennett or Hananya Naftali, excuse me. He's the one that praised this and said, look, and they're one of the people within their group is the one that drew the line around it and made it look like a grenade launcher. And when you remove the line, it's a bike. You can see it. They added bumps where none were. I mean, it's deliberate misrepresentation to hide the fact that they murdered children. Now, and there's, and shoot, there's so many of these that I'm remembering right now that are so important. There was an example today of people being killed, and then they tried to cover it up by rolling their bodies into the beach. It was all caught on film. Oh, Jesus. I'm going to leave it there so we don't waste any more time. God, it's just so messed up. The point here, Israeli soldiers are openly taking Gazans as human shields to protect their tanks. How many times do we need to show you this? Do you not see how obvious this is? IDF soldiers are themselves posting these pictures because they know there will be no consequences or even media coverage. This is a systematic practice known as, it's actually the neighbor procedure. And I post this right down here. The Israeli practice called the neighbor procedure, which has been called a violation of international law by the UN, is an open secret like everything else surrounding Zionism. 2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shields avoid jail. Defense for Children International, an international human rights group. Israel forces use 5 Palestinian children as human shields. That's 2023. This is from 2017. Generally, human shields. Since the beginning of the occupation in 1967, Israeli security forces have repeatedly used Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as human shields. Israeli soldiers routinely use Palestinian civilians as human shields by forcing them to carry out life-threatening tasks. It was also following a high court petition against this practice, which was filed by human rights organizations around the world in May 2002, that the IDF issued a general order prohibiting the use of Palestinians as a means of human shield against gunfire or attacks by the Palestinian side. But then it goes on to say, following the order, the use of human shields dropped sharply. However, the army did not construe as a human shield the use of Palestinians, provided they consented. The army continued the widespread use of this practice, which they referred to as the neighbor procedure. Following another petition filed by human rights organizations, the High Court of Justice ruled that this practice, too, violated international humanitarian law and that this thus was illegal. And guess what they've never stopped doing? Here is the Institute for Middle East Understanding, the neighbor procedure, Israel's use of Palestinian human shields from 2012. Human Rights Watch. During military operations, Israeli soldiers routinely coerced Palestinian civilians, including children, to perform life-endangering acts that assisted military operations, the practice known as the neighbor procedure. Now, see this? Now, there's an entire show around that, by the way, and I should actually include that for you if you'd like to watch it. And there's 2 we've done about with this kind of premise. One is the open secret about human trafficking, or rather, human shields, but then the other one is the open secret of how they steal organs. And the reason I call it an open, I'll just give you the Rumble video. The reason I call it an open secret is because it's transparently obvious. There's all sorts of investigations and documents. I did find this other one, by the way. Before I get too weeded in finding things that I would have talked about, let's finish this point. It says this is very low ratio that he claims. So remember, his point is prosecuting one of the most careful wars ever recorded. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the show today. This is a very low ratio, he says, of civilian fighter deaths in perhaps the toughest circumstances. The idea that somehow, widespread use of human shields, like all these claims they're using, and the idea that in no way, sense, shape, or form are they using any kind of pinpoint, like again, they have admitted using dumb bombs, bombing the safe areas. The New York Times and Haaretz have proven this. And yet here he is just lying, just wholesale pretending it's not true. In a recent raid on Shifa, which a Hamas headquarter based, again, oh yeah, you mean the hospital, the base that you weren't able to find the first time and pretended you did and lied about it, but then magically found it the next time? Well, if you found it the next time, Doesn't that mean you lied about it the first time? Do you guys even think about how these things line up? You claimed you found the headquarters under Shifa the last time, right? And everyone said, that's stupid. Where's the tunnel? Where's the big room you said was there? BBC caught you lying and placing guns around the MRM machine, which you did again, by the way, which doesn't make sense because that wouldn't be possible. The point is that if you claimed you then found it this next time, you lied about finding it the first time. You can't recognize that? They don't care. The idea is that nobody believes these allegations, and barely anybody's even reported this in the corporate media because they got burned by it. They blindly followed it the first time, and they looked really stupid. And it says, we killed about 170 terrorists. Well, don't forget, they said on the record when they spoke to NBC that they killed 170 suspected terrorists. That was the quote from the IDF. It's just unbelievable. And he goes, 0 civilian casualties. Are you kidding me? Guys, this is worse than again, it's obvious. And everyone, including the United States, is calling some of this out. And he's going, and this is my point that makes me the most mad. Not saying it's less than they're saying, but saying 0 civilian casualties. They've admitted otherwise. Friends, let me be clear. He says, at this very moment, radical Islamic terrorists in Madrid, New York, Paris, London are following this war. And there it is. It's coming to your borders soon. You know what? Quite frankly, I feel that's a threat. Knowing the kind of ISIS-K, Crocus City Hall conversation, the way we view this, and history is clear that Zionists have used terrorism to achieve pretty much everything in its history. Let's realize that this threat has been made before. Let's also not forget that we've already seen a Mossad asset caught at the southern border, which the right-wing media just ignored the moment it turned out it wasn't who they thought it was. Can't talk about Israel. It says, if Israel's blocked from defeating Hamas, which again, they're making that clear, they're pretending that you're stopping them, right? By saying you have to feed civilians or you have to have a ceasefire so you can exchange for your hostages. But it's your fault that we're doing, it's everyone else's fault that you can't commit your genocide, even though you already have. Each one of them will be inspired, he says. So by stopping this, you're going to say you're going to inspire terrorism. And what you're doing is inspiring terrorism. And that's the whole reality of what Zionism truly is. As a lot of Jews are speaking up about today, your very entity, your very presence is putting Jews at more risk by lying about anti-Semitism, by downplaying, by calling criticism of Israel anti-Semitism. Then suddenly true racism falls under the radar, which, by the way, is probably what you want, seeing as how Zionism is anti-Semitism at its core. Now it says, if we crush Hamas, their hopes for terror will be crushed along, period. Yes, you didn't finish that sentence. You will be safer. Hardly. History has shown exactly the opposite. Are we safer because of the war on terror that you pushed the United States into? No. In fact, that was the point. You created the very thing that you claim you're fighting. Why? Because they funded the radical elements of exactly what they claimed they were fighting. Just like we can prove to you that they were funding Hamas. And the one that's important is, as we played that clip in the beginning, is the Mossad chief visited Qatar, which is where they're keeping the protected entities, and convincing them, convincing them to bring, which we told you, played the clip, $1.5 billion in cash in a place where they can only buy weapons. You can't buy humanitarian aid inside of an area where it must be delivered. So what do you think that's for, guys? It's obvious. And they've lied about that. And the Haaretz article, of course, I think it'll be right there by now. Anyone who wants to support thwarting the establishment of the Palestinian state, while they're screaming that everybody wants it except Hamas won't let it happen. Things like that should end the conversation, guys. That's transparent. And yet here he is telling you you'll be safer if you let them murder all these civilians under the guise of fighting the group they're keeping safe in Qatar. That's what's happening. Bottom line, you actually know the truth. He says, Israel has no choice but to defeat Hamas and bring over hostages, which, by the way, are counterintuitive. They're contradictory. If you're going to go after and bombing Hamas, well, that's exactly where they're being held. And you've already killed some of them by doing that. And all the families know that. That's why they're screaming for you to take the deal that Hamas is offering and acting like everyone supports what you're doing. And nobody seems to, not even the United States. This is why they're so desperate. And here is what Scott Ritter said. Aren't you the Magellan commander who got his unit compromised in Lebanon back in 1996? Yes, he was. And then called in artillery on a UN compound to cover your retreat? Yes, he did. Killing 106 civilians? Uh-huh. He says, you have zero moral authority. Sit down and shut the F up. And by the way, that has way more engagement than this guy's does. Now, my point about the poll, right? So we have one side of this where they're telling you the Gallup poll saying most people don't support Israel. Well, what do you know? What a shocking coincidence. Right after that comes out, it's almost like they produce their own. How do I keep telling you it's reactive? And by the way, what's hilarious, if you just search for this graph or just Gaza poll, guess what you'll find? Every single one of the same people you expect, all posting basically the same words with basically the same picture. Aviva Klampas, Eli David, Elon Levy, Halil, what's his name? Zig, all of them almost like they were directed to. It's crazy, right? Well, because what you'll find is, guess what? Completely different than the other poll. 79% of Americans support Israel. Yeah, you read that right. Strange how different those are, right? On this side, you're getting a historic amount of lacking of support for Israel from most everybody, predominantly the young generations, which lines up with what Greenblatt was quietly, secretly saying while pretending it was about China and a two-party illusion divide. How did it go from 7? It's because they did their own poll. And polls are easy to lie about and manipulate. So they go to ask only the people. It's just very clear. And this is pathetic. It's clumsy. It's right after that happens. I don't believe any of this. Quite frankly, I don't believe any polls for that matter. That's why I only use the other one to make this point. I don't use poll data ever because it's so transparently manipulatable. This is just sad to me that that's all they can do. That these people at some level, their core, know that they're lying about stuff. Even if they tell themselves it's for some greater good. I mean, unless you're a sociopath, that has to wear on you. Now, we just showed you this one, Human Shields. Here's the one that I was able to find as well. And let's get into this about, what's actually happening. Here's one of these examples. This is from the Cradle. Killed in cold blood. And it says, horrifying footage aired by Al Jazeera showed the Israeli army's cold-blooded execution of 2 completely unarmed Palestinians. One of them one was waving a white flag. The other one had their arms up. They shot them. While one of them very clearly while their hands were raised, then, in the interest of due diligence and, due process and democracy, they dig them, they bury them in the sand with the bulldozer, because that's how democracies work, right? As if we should want democracy in the first place, the mob rule and the way that's abused. The point is, these are the lies that we're told. And it's just very obvious that this is not the reality. So here's this video. Just makes me sick. Now, I had an entire section today about the Gaza port that I'm not going to be able to get to. And that's one of the points that we've been talking about, right from the beginning. Shout out to Sharon Wilkinson for pointing this out. The easily provable reality. And I think she's the first one I saw point that out. Sadly, there's been a lot of independent articles written about that point that nobody credits her, which is kind of sadly how this works these days. But she pointed out very clearly that they were using rubble that was full of dead Palestinian bodies. Literally, you could see, which I had, an image of a dumpster truck going by with rubble where you could see a hand in it. And it's just grotesque. How do you live? How do you act as a human being and do that? Like, think from the the side of an Israeli or a Jewish person, how extreme it is about how the importance about the burial, and same thing for Palestinians. Of course, it doesn't matter because they're human animals, according to pretty much everybody speaking about this on the Israeli government side. And see, this is why recently Israel was isolated at the United Nations Security Council as they demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, right? Which I don't know what this image is about, because that the U.S. abstained. The point is that they abstained and everybody else voted yes, as you saw. We talked about it. And yet Israel ignored it, just like we told you they would. And just based on the council members claiming this is binding, either way, they wouldn't. Israel openly said they wouldn't care anyway, either way. And don't forget, we've talked about this. They've publicly said they don't have to follow international law, yet oddly and interestingly force it on people that they don't like. Just how do you not see that as a special circumstance? That's what Zionism is. There's a very sensitive thing that's been covered up by the allegation of anti-Semitism for a very long time. This is the new discussion. We'll get into our actually clip about it. We mentioned this. We read this in the last show, but this was on the 25th, posted on the 26th. Anatomy of a Genocide, report of the Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, on the situation in human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. Well, again, the reality, she's talking about the areas occupied since then in regard to the two-state solution forward. My point, again, is do not miss the fact that this is occupied, all of it, Palestine, per United Nations documents going back to, the one I just recently read was 1978. It was 1978. It was discussing specifically the right of return. And openly discusses how all of this, it's very clear. So just don't forget that. Today, it's important to think in the two-state solution forward, or, in some context, as long as whatever the Palestinians ultimately want to agree to, because there's the legal right in this whole situation. That's what we should, that's what we should go on. And I do think that makes the most sense, especially since there are Israeli families that have no stake in this, just like in any other situation. But the bottom line, 1967 forward, West Bank, Gaza. And the point being, overwhelming and obvious genocide based on every metric. And this is the UN side of the World Court, the International Court of Justice. They have now pointed this out. They've now passed the UN resolution. So Israel's on the block at this point. The whole world sees it. And most every government who at least pretended we're supposed to be bound by these things is now, now I shouldn't even say slowly, but it's been 5+ months, but is now starting to call this stuff out from a lot of different angles. Now, I read this to you before. It's everything we've already discussed. The amount of death, it's overwhelming. Life-changing mutilations. She does a good job on highlighting all the stuff we're going to talk about today. Realize this is a big deal. Israel doesn't care. And you know what that does for Israel, or for the United States, and for Biden, and for Trump, if he was there? It makes it really hard for them to pretend like they're trying to stop this, right? Because you can't keep pretending like they're doing all they're supposed to, which, by the way, is actually the only argument they have right now. If you can believe it, after everything we talked about, and even the U.S. saying they're not doing enough, even the U.S. saying they're withholding aid, then seemingly coming over today in the last couple of days and saying, no, they're in line with international law. That's just ridiculous. That's like Pompeo saying the illegal West Bank settlements are somehow he didn't use, I forget what word he used. This is how politics works. Some kind of weird, I can't even think about it. He's basically suggesting they were in line with international law. But he used a word that was kind of ambiguous. And then again, that's when, was it, who am I blanking on right now? When the current administration rolled it back and said that they are illegal, because they are. It's ridiculous. The point is that this is as obvious as it's ever been in my lifetime. And everybody sees it. And the fact that now the UN and the World Court and everybody else, including most of their allies, are actively highlighting this. I just don't know how they can stand there and make that argument, which, again, the reason I'm saying this and stressing it, stand back and ask yourself, when they know we all see it, specifically their own population, their own United States citizens, but the world at large, and people that are already calling them genocidal and literally accusing them and calling for them to be, and actually, I think they're already being called to be in front of the World Court. Biden specifically and Blinken. And yet they still stand up today with the most evidence we've had thus far and go, nope, nothing's wrong. In line with international law, because you realize that statement means there's no genocide, there's no famine, there's no war crimes, there's no anything. Even though they've already suggested at least subtly, that there are. And it's just that shows you they're compromised. There's something wrong right there. There's a reason they're destroying their own political careers to continue something that the world is already aware of. I can't stress that enough. That is wild. Whether it's sexual blackmail, whether it's threatening their families, I'm not saying I know that, but what else could it possibly be? I'm not trying to be super subjective here. I'm just pointing out things that it could be. Realize that there, in my opinion, that's all I'm saying, there's clearly something that is making them either think that they're going to somehow be able to get away with this, or that they can't do it. There's just nothing else they can do. So here is some of the stuff that's happening. Despite all of that, despite the awareness, despite the world calling it out, the World Court, United Nations, human rights groups, every country, everywhere it seems, and the populations, they're doing this after that. So not only do they not roll it back, you could at least argue that they would try to make it quieter, try to make it a little less flamboyant. But no. As they're called out, they go even harder. And not only harder, they make it more clear. They stand up and say, we're going to do it in your face. We're going to post it on all of our Instagram channels and our social media. Here is Israel bombing children while they are breaking for fast during Ramadan.
معظم الإصابات التي وصلت إلى مستشفى المركز هي من الأطفال وتصل إلى المنزل في مخيم الشبورة وسط مدينة رفح.
It's one after another, after another. And this is the one, oh, you know what? We did have this. We already kind of showed you this. I thought that's maybe why I closed the other one. Al Jazeera showing you the fact that they murder these people with their hands raised with a white flag and then literally bury their bodies in the sand. Just another day in Gaza. Here is Save Our Citizens talking about how they were executing children right in front of Al-Shifa Hospital, which, by the way, was openly stated by corporate media when discussing this with Israeli counterparts, because it's transparent. I mean, it was even discussed openly in a State Department briefing. I think I even have it here today. Openly shooting and sniping people from hospitals, burning down buildings. They've lost control. Like, they've lost control at the highest levels of this controlled conversation, which is really fascinating, but it's still happening. And it says these horrific violations of international law are blatant war crimes, adding to the long list of atrocities committed by U.S.-backed Israeli forces in the context of the genocide of Palestinians. 6 months in, when will they be stopped?
The occupation forces have burned and destroyed a number of buildings here, as you can see. The amount of destruction is massive due to continuous bombardment and air raids. Some families are still here because of the presence of an Israeli sniper and the Israeli army's policy of targeting and shooting at everything moving in the area. Some of the dead are still under the rubble. Medical teams couldn't get to this place because of the danger. As you can see, all the buildings and roads are destroyed.
Right, and one of the big parts about the roads being destroyed is intentional. I showed you, they have those machines where they're driving it down the road with like a hook that just tears up the center of the road. There's no reason you do that other than to stop them from being able to get around and being able to move aid to where they need it. This is a deliberate starvation campaign in every possible way. Here is Middle East Monitor. Israel executed 13 children in Gaza in front of their families, according to an NGO. And this is the Euromed Human Rights Group. It's constant, guys. Here is Mohammed Al-Shida highlighting the Al-Shifa Hospital, which, if you haven't seen it, right, all their lies about suddenly finding the new place, well, it doesn't, even if let's just even say what they said was true. They've gone on to do things that you could still prove were war crimes, right? So his point, Al-Shifa Hospital, burned, bombed, and shelled and besieged by Israel in broad daylight for 8 days in a row. Burned, by the way, means the IDF soldiers walked inside safely, took their time to set it on fire without facing any threat from inside that building. Scott Ritter made this point. If they're able to plant explosives, for example, like we keep seeing them do, that means they're violating the law because they went in, they weren't in danger, so there was no need to demolish the building. They did it anyway because it's not about Hamas, guys. It's obvious. This was Gaza's largest hospital, one of the few that was actually still giving some level. Here's Quds News Network pointing out, this is footage from inside Al-Shifa Hospital, showing that they are fighting from within Al-Shifa Hospital. God, I hate Twitter. Now here is another one, and this is from inside the building itself. The point is, they've transformed the hospital into a military base with Palestinian detainees seen in this video tied and blindfolded in the corridors. So they're engaging in combat while they have human shields inside of a hospital. Think about that, which shouldn't be that shocking, seeing as how it's a public procedure that we just showed them doing. I mean, again, here's the active image that they're doing. This is now, guys, for the image that I use on this show itself. Literally a kid belt buckled to the front of the car. And this is a famous one. They were engaging with people. I mean, this is what they do. And the whole international community has called it out. They just are too cowardly to say it now, I guess. And here's another example of this. Well, let me just do this next. I'll show you the Al-Shifa point next. Here's a video. As Yunus Tarawi points out, no translation needed. Admitting war crimes right on tape. And frankly, the way he's talking about this, it makes you think that he doesn't even know that.
This was a school that is now an IDF outpost. When they found this school, they found Hamas summer camp brochures here in the school to give it to the kids.
Okay, so right there is a war crime. It doesn't matter what you think, whether Hamas, Human Shield. The point is, he says we found brochures, which, by the way, why we would believe that anyway. But even if they did, that's not a justification to use a school as a military headquarters or a military base or whatever. You're literally admitting you're using a school as a military base. That is what you pretend Hamas does. Based on the fact that you found some flyers in there. And let's realize even then, like, again, assuming that's even true, you realize this is a group that Israel gave billions of dollars in order to make sure that they were ubiquitous in this government. So it forced people in Gaza to work through these channels, even if they didn't want to. And so you ended up with these things all over the place. That's because of Israel. And yes, it doesn't mean there's sure people that supported them. And maybe there's some of them that supported them as they started to become more of a resistance group that have funded Israel's proxy. But however you look at it, what he's telling you there is we're breaking the law and we don't care. It's just everywhere. And this is why the ICJ was saying this is the easiest intent we've ever seen. Forensic architecture follows up on the Al-Shifa hospital example and says the second Israeli raid on Al-Shifa compound in Gaza is still ongoing. This was yesterday. The limited visuals that have surfaced depict horrific scenes of fires raging in the specialized surgery building and the arrest and detention of Palestinians, reportedly totaling in the many of hundreds. Look at this. They are murdering innocent people. That's what's actually happening by every account, by doctors who are not Palestinian from other countries that are there in the. I mean, we talked about Abu Sita, who's from London, who was working in this hospital. He has been telling you from the very beginning. He was there. There's no evidence of any of this. He saw them shoot people out front. I mean, it's overwhelming. Again, I don't even need to stress this. The evidence is everywhere you look. They just hope that you just blindly take their word and go with it. In a video published by an Israeli journalist, but that's what's important about this part that I just showed you, them shooting from inside the hospital. That's an Israeli journalist taken from inside Al-Shifa. The hospital's main courtyard resembles a battlefield while they're shooting. So the point is, by the way, Forensic Architecture is a well-respected group. They already broke down a few of these, and they're showing you that they are lying to you. Here is a Middle East Eye post showing you, this is a Palestinian woman who is telling you what happened to her when she was detained. This is what's actually happening in most of these. That what we're talking about is the detention of, and as we just read, by the way, in the last show from the 1957 discussion, also, interestingly, in Rafah and Khan Yunis, and this is a historical precedent, the same thing's happening again, that they went after everybody between the ages of 18 and 45. And we already told you this. We already told you this was happening right when this first started. They're just rounding up every man they can find. In some cases, women too, and raping them, as we've already seen the UN tell us, but nobody wants to hear that. There is actual evidence to that, and it goes back decades. It's very overwhelming. And on top of that, beaten, buried alive, strip searched, run over with tanks. All of this has been documented. And this is just one person telling you what happened to her. Her hands were zip tied. She was abused.
وفي الجحل الكلاشين يضلوا يخبط يقول أنت كذابة.
Do you remember seeing this image? About 30 Palestinian men, stripped of most of their clothes, herded away on the back of an open truck by the Israeli army in Gaza. Among the men is just one woman.
أنا هديل يوسف عيسى الدحدوح.
Hadil is the only woman on the truck, and back in December she was taken away by the Israeli army, along with her husband Rushdie, where they were interrogated and tortured in detention. This is her testimony of being beaten, buried alive and strip-searched by Israeli forces. Hadil is a mother of 2 children and was taken away from her breastfeeding child for over 80 days. When asked about her children, Hadil breaks down crying as she was separated from her 9-month-old breastfeeding son Zain and her 4-year-old son Muhammad. Hadil was taken away to an undisclosed location where she was drugged and violently interrogated about the events of the 7th of October.
طلعونا من البيت فصلوا الزلام في منطقة الزيتون إحنا من غزة الزيتون خشوا علينا اليهود اعتقلوني أنا وزوجي قلت لما نزلونا من قلب الدبابة غموني وحطوا يدي ورا في المرابط عصوم علي وعصوا على عيني وقعدوني نفس القعدة هذه اللي أنا كنت قاعداها في البيت اللي كنت فيه. بعدين أخذوا مني فحص واخذوا من جوزي وعمي وسلفي واللي كانوا معايا فحص برضه بعدوها خدرونا.
Hadil tried to tell the Israeli soldiers that she was a breastfeeding mother, and when she asked to be returned to her young son, they said no and started hitting her.
يقولوا لا صار يضربني الجندي يجي من ورايا في الكلاشين قاعد يضربني على ظهري يقول انت حماس اقول له لا وكنت اعيط. هذا صاروا يحققوا معانا على 7 اكتوبر صار يقول لي انت حماس قلت له لا. كان بهذه الفتره انه ايديا ب3 ايام ورا وكانوا المرابط معسوسين يعني هي من الاصال كانوا اكثر من هيك كانت عذبت.
Her uncle, who was detained with her, asked the Israeli soldiers to loosen the zip ties on her hands, but instead, the Israeli soldiers tightened them.
ثاني الليلة نقلونا في دار هيك كانت كبيرة كانوا فيها كثير شباب يمكن أكثر من 100 شاب وأنا في الشلة اللي كنت معاهم مرة كنت خايفة وهيك متوترة وكنت حالة انهيار صار معايا من الوجع اللي فيها كان والعناية اللي كنت نعمة يجي يعول زي الكلب بالجندة يصير يحول ورايا. كانوا الشباب يقولوا بدهم يروحوا الحمام ما خلوهمش يروحوا على الحمام يعملوها على حالهم. كانوا الشباب يتعذبوا يعني كنت شايفاهم وعناية كنت نعمة يعني من كتر ما عصي علي العصبة تاعتهم.
Later on, at another detention center, the Israeli forces put her in a large hole in the ground with several other men and started burying them alive. She says they brought a tank to them and the tank was so close she thought it was going to run her over. One of the Israeli troops shot his gun twice in the air and told her he killed her husband. It was a form of psychological torture.
صرت أعيط بهذه الفترة وكان الشباب يعيطوا برضه دفنوهم بقوا يدفنونا وإحنا عايشين. صرت أقول شو بدك تعمل فينا صار يقول لي بدي أدفنكم وأنتوا عايشين وخلي الكلاب تاكلكم. صرت أقول له لا تخلوا زي ما تاخذ جوزي. كل هذه الفترة انهيار وعياط.
One of the men being buried next to her was her father-in-law. When she tried to get him out of the dirt, despite her hands being tied and blindfolded, one of the Israeli soldiers hit her with the back of his gun. Her husband adds that the holes were like craters of airstrikes. They put around 100 men in the hole, and the tank would circle the hole and cover them with dirt.
في اللي هو ضموا نصهم بعدين طلعونا منها
بعد نص ساعة يمكن طلعونا ولا
يعني
ساعة.
كله هذا ايش اللي هو كان يعملوا زي رباك للبني ادمين يقول لك يعني انهيار بده يخليك تموت وتطمن عليك وانتم طيبين.
أنا بهذه الفترة إنه قالوا لي إن جوزك مات.
After 30 minutes, the Israeli soldiers took them out and loaded them onto another truck. And despite still being the only woman, they took her hijab off and photographed her.
نزعوا حجابه ومصورين كانوا.
Now, as I always say, that may seem small to people that don't care about other people's religions, which makes you a bad person, quite frankly. But the point at the end of the day is that it matters to them and very important to them. And the idea is, despite the narratives coming from Western discussions, a lot of people in other parts of the world believe in this. And even from an Iranian perspective, there's an entire movement, as Robert discusses, of people in Iran who wear that as a symbol of defiance to the West. And yes, some that don't think they should have to. And that's their battle to fight out, like we do in our country, about debating about one thing or the other, right? The point is, it's not the West's place to step in and dictate what they're discussing, because it's not the same thing they're making it out to be. It's not some solely oppressive concept. It's a belief that many people still hold. And the idea here is that by doing that, it's an obviously intentional way to disrespect her, to scare her, and to abuse her. That's and Israeli channels, and they will laugh about this. They will post it. That's why they love playing with their lingerie and the different things, because they're doing this to insult them and torture them, and just because they hate them. Not every Israeli or every Jew, but the ones we're talking about. And don't you love how we always have to clarify that?
والشباب كلهم كانوا فوقية في الشارع، أنا كنت معاهم وأسأل عمي أقول له وين جوزي، يقولوا لي مات، يحتاج الفترة يقولوا لي مات.
They took them to another detention center where Hadil was surrounded by other detained women. She says they strip-searched them in front of female soldiers, took their money, gold, passport, and phone, and gave them prison clothes. Hadil says the Israeli forces interrogated her about 5 times, asking her what she was doing on the 7th of October, to which she said she was a normal citizen and we hadn't done anything. And she knows nothing about Hamas, but they still tortured her after.
وبعرف شيء عن حماس، قال لي وين لن فتحتهم، قلت بعرفش أنا عنهم شيء، وإنه نفس الأجوبة كل شيء أقول له بعرفش شيء ويضربني، يقول أنت كذابة، أقول له لا مش كذابة، ويكون لابس زي شيء عقده وضل يخبطني في راسي.
In the 6 days she spent at this detention camp, she said they put them in cages in the freezing cold and kept them tied up from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night. She said they hurled swear words at them and accused them of all being Hamas and insulted the Prophet Muhammad. There were 19 women and girls, the youngest of which was 15 years old. She said, why would they take them away from me? I didn't do anything to the Israelis. Hadil was taken from her home and detained by Israeli forces without reason for 54 days, from the 6th of December 2023 and returned on the 26th of January 2024. Hadil and her husband were returned separately, but managed to find each other and their children.
Imagine dealing with that, right? Not a Hamas member. 56 days? Like, in what world does that make sense? Only democracy, right? Just arbitrarily arrest random people, beat them up, torture them, bury them alive, abuse them, and then just arbitrarily detain them for 54 days with no charge. I mean, it takes a special kind of ignorance, a willful ignorance, and, a genocidal tendency to pretend like this is not happening, like we can see it. And that's the thing, guys. It's that easy to see, which means these people that are pretending it's not happening are, for any number of reasons, just don't care. It's got to be pretty shocking, especially for people that you think might care. Now, here's Jerusalem Post. Out of 1,542 IDF sexual assault complaints, only 31 indictments filed. Just showing you a clear history of the way they disregard this, both for people abused in Israel or Palestine. Palestinians beaten and sexually assaulted at Israeli detention centers. Hey, same picture. Isn't that interesting? The Guardian. So if you think, whichever side you want to look at, everyone's covering it. That's the point I'm trying to show you. It's very clear what's actually happening. Don't trust corporate media. Don't trust independent media. Trust your own due diligence and realize it's that easy to prove. It's everywhere. And there's evidence behind it. UN experts appalled by reported human rights violations against Palestinian women and girls, which, by the way, includes rape, both boys and girls. Here's an example of what we're talking about, guys. You may be forgiven for thinking what you're looking at is something that happened on the festival, right? Nope. A reminder, this is how Israeli interrogators are being conducted since October 7th. Interrogations. Anybody they're arresting, regardless of whether they're suspected or not, are treated the way they treat any Palestinian, as a human animal. It says, keep this footage in mind whenever you see an Israeli propaganda clip of, quote, a Palestinian terrorist confessing to rape, cannibalism, space lasers, blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines. His point is, when they do this kind of stuff and literally force somebody to testify however they want, which they do every time, as we've already seen prove to not be true, gee, maybe it's not true. Or at the very least, it could be a lie. I mean, come on. Here is an example of what they're doing to these people. And realize, even the ones we just showed you, as she's testifying, most of them just get let go. Yet they tell you they're all terrorists. Mossad and Eli David, all of them come out and say, look at all these terrorists that just surrendered. You mean all the ones they just let go? So they're letting terrorists go? Or you admit it? The point is they don't care. They will come out and say whatever is supposed to be said. And even though we can look back and go, well, they were wrong, they're lying, and they don't care. This is what's actually happening. What is that for? Torture, hatred, racism. And doesn't this look like what we're supposed to think the other side was doing? Which, by the way, is certainly possible. But just think about how wild that is. What they're doing is a gross violation of every single thing we pretend we're fighting for. They don't care. And guys, these are examples of people that they're simply arresting and interrogating. Now, here to that example is kind of what I was showing you before. You might have seen this come out today. Trigger warning, saying we interrogated this guy along with a whole bunch of other people. And weird how every one of them has a different narrative and they all seem to hit certain talking points. Yes, we had all these people in the hospital. Yes, we raped women. Yes, we did. What was it? Yes, we did that. Tell us what we're supposed to say here. Now, I'm not saying we know that for sure, but you have to realize, guys, how many times, this is their own people have spoken up about this. Hold on, I'm going to have to grab it from the, let me grab it from the other browser real quick. It pops up pretty quick. The point being is that historically, where is it? Oh, that's why. Hold on. There we go. And this is just one of them, but it's a pretty prominent article that was a big story that was from Israeli media. And the point is that this is what they're known for. Guys, and this is prominent within Israeli society. This is an Israeli court, I-24 News. An Israeli court says Shin Bet pressured a man to give false testimony. Right? And this, you could talk about this is what they do. There's videos they've put out where they're doing that, where they're going, look, they'll keep denying it and they'll eventually tell us the truth. Or are you just continuing to stab them and torture them and sexually abuse them until they say whatever? And there's a video of that child that was very, very famous. Remember the young child in front of the Israeli court by himself with no parents, kids like 7 years old, and they're screaming at him. And literally what he says is, yes, whatever you say, whatever you're saying is true. Let me go. Like, that's what he's saying. And they use that as a confession. This is, and I'm not saying that means that there's probably times when people do confess. The point is, you can't pretend like this or this or that or that or that. Oh, by the way, all I'm searching for is just what's on my For You tab, by the way. There's no search in the law. What I'm showing you is that every single one of them, I didn't do this. This is just how it lined up in my, isn't that funny? Israel somebody, there's Hananya Naftali, there's Avinia Klampas, there's AIPAC, here's Ambassador Gilead, all of them, one after another, because there's somebody that day said, this is what we're supposed to talk about, not the starvation, the simple reality that they're telling you, this person said what we told him to say, or whatever. That under pressure of torture and death, he said the thing that we claim is true. And that's what you get. And this is his point. This is what they're doing to get these people to say what they want. Right? They do this as a matter of policy. And here, I'll make sure I include this one for you too. That's an important one. And guys, I've done an entire segment on this. I think I had 15, 16 tabs open of all very big and historical cases where they're telling you they got false testimony. Here is Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur. This is, first of all, Rem Asalim is saying, together with other colleagues, I have expressed our alarm regarding accounts of rape by the Israeli occupation forces in February, last month. It is abhorrent that such reports of sexual violence continue unabated. Now, you might start to ask why, or it might start to explain a little further why they keep aggressively recycling their false narratives that have nothing to back them up. Why? Because there's a lot of evidence behind these claims. Not to mention, it says that this is but one of multiple forms of violence that Palestinian women are subjected to on the basis of being Palestinian and being women. Do you think this is because October 7th, guys? These are people in the UN that have been pointing this stuff out in human rights groups for 45 years. It's that transparent. It says rape and other forms of sexual violence can constitute war crimes against humanity or constitutive act with respect to genocide. It must stop. And this is another person saying, oh, and this was one of these people that were admitting this stuff. Women in Gaza are being raped and it's not being investigated or reported. That's a Canadian doctor working in Gaza. And here's what Francesca says. I lost count of how many renowned journalists interviewed me on the alleged mistreatment of sexual abuse against Palestinian women by Israeli forces and never published any article on this. I mean, she said, maybe one day I'll talk about it in my memoir. Point is, it's so it's transparent. It's out there, and there's something stopping it from being ubiquitous. I think we know what that is today. Here is Muhammad al-Shihada pointing out the IDF is deliberately fostering a genocidal spirit of vengeance among soldiers and officers against the entirety of Gaza, which we know by now. And it says because they believe it helps boost soldiers' morale, which they've written about. Soldiers and officers consider looting, burning, destroying Gazan homes helpful for morale. Haaretz writing, the army itself apparently believes the spirit of vengeance is important and instrumental. Oh, really? Is that even so shocking to anybody? That's crazy. And this is what I'm you, they casually write about this because this is something that's actually been grossly ingrained into a lot of people in Israel, that it's important to be vengeful. Who in the world thinks that's a good thing? The bottom line is you're creating a situation where you're allowing them to break international law because it helps them feel better. Oh, and it also creates them it actually grows sociopathic tendencies. You just go out there and violate human rights and make fun of people who are suffering and sexually abuse people. And this goes back to the origins of Zionism, guys, from the first Nakba, the second Nakba, and their proud discussions of how they did all those things. They're publicly accessible. They're all over the internet. Similarly, it says the looting of Gazans, Palestinians, is an element in the vengeance dialogue that no one is concealing any longer. That's a quote. They say that because they're not. Biden's lying about it. Trump is lying about it. We're all being lied to about it in the Western world. It says there are people in the army who are pleased about the fostering of vengeance. They think that it motivates the soldiers. Yeah, can you take a guess who that might be? All the Zionist party, the religious Zionism party in particular. Netanyahu, specifically the most extreme, then Gavir, Smotrich, all those ones, Gallant, all the people like that. This is being written by an Israeli platform. This one is, let's see, Political Grassroots Movement, History, Geostrategy, America, baby, with, but wildly pro-Israel in Hebrew. Yeah, sure. It says Israel has created a new standard for urban warfare. Why will no one admit it? That's real. That's written by an American veteran, by the way. Oh, and that's right. I mean, by the way, what's funny is that link doesn't even go to the article. So maybe he didn't want you to read it. Maybe he just wanted to read what he said about it, probably for a very clear reason. But he writes it all in Hebrew down here if you want to translate it. But all you have to do is search for the title. The point is very clear. I went over it in depth and then got frustrated I did because the bottom line, Israel said they did it like this. Israel said they only arrested these people. Israel claims that they only make it like, that's it. The whole thing is IDF swore. There's no data. There's nothing but Newsweek talking to the IDF and going, how dare you challenge what they said? That's what it is. Or specifically, the opinion piece written by this person that is still published by the editorial team of Newsweek. And all it amounts to is Israel said. And how dare you? Why won't anybody admit that they're doing the thing that they told us they're doing without evidence? That's what that amounts to. And the proof is shockingly the obvious. They're making a new standard for urban warfare. Well, yeah, maybe if you take it at the fact that they're killing more people than ever. The idea that you're pretending what they're doing is pinpoint targeting or killing less people than ever is completely undermined by, every metric involved in this conversation. And I'll include the Al-Shifa points here if you want to go into that, because we talked about it earlier. Now, we talked about Rafah and the atrocities. Latter half of this, let's go through what's going on in Rafah. And still, and this probably won't be as long as the first half. There's just things that I want to show you because I think it's important to see what is currently happening. Some of them we already showed you in a general sense, killing of children. What we're seeing today and the last week there is the ongoing onslaught in Rafah. And this is why this one's so crazy to me. The world is making this argument. And what it really does show me is from the U.S. perspective, they're fine with all of this as long as you're looking in the wrong direction, which shouldn't be shocking. They've done it themselves in every one of these countries. Let me look at Libya, look at Afghanistan, look at Syria, look at all of them. They don't care about human life. They want you to think they do. The point is, they're happy to look the other way as long as you're not aware. We'll wait to see what happens. Give us a plan before you invade Rafah, as they bomb Rafah. The next day, let's make sure we've got a cogent plan before we go in. And they keep bombing Rafah. And they're starving everybody there. And they keep shooting anyone that walks out. And the next day, let's talk about the plan. They're just hoping that you're not looking, that all you're doing is looking at their back and forth like some world stage as if that's the truth. It's like the ceasefire and everything else. Hamas denies the ceasefire. No, they didn't. And it's all about narratives spun by blind followers and Zionist liars. And then, I guess the Biden government would be blind followers or Zionist followers, however you look at it. And the truth, they have been bombing Rafah for a long time now, in a place where we're told they're planning for something. So you're telling us at a time when you haven't decided what's going to happen, just in case you're bombing into the civilian area. Do you know where you're bombing? Are you bombing Hamas members? If that's the case, why don't you move them out of the way first? The point is, guys, it's obvious and you know it. They're killing civilians, and they're proud about it. Here are some of the most disgusting examples, and I don't mean in the sense that they're most graphic. Quite frankly, I avoid the most graphic because I don't think it's necessary. But some people may need to be seen it, I guess, but that's not what we're going to show you today. But I am going to show you some images that I think are hard to see. So be prepared for that. It's just sad to see children being killed and such a blithe disregard for the fact that it's even happening. First of all, this is 7 Palestinians were just killed, dozens injured in Israeli airstrikes in Rafah, southern Gaza. In Rafah and southern Gaza right now, despite the fact that we're working on a plan. Biden's working on a plan. But in the meantime, keep killing as many children as possible, and we won't talk about it. That's the U.S. agreement right now. Palestinian children were injured by an Israeli airstrike in Rafah. Each one of these are different circumstances, guys. Each one of them. Sarah Wilkinson shares this. This is just a sad story. A Palestinian 11-year-old named Razan Arafat is crying with her. I'm assuming it's maybe extended family or people that are just being kind to her, because apparently her entire family was killed in the airstrike, and she also had to amputate her leg because she was caught in it. But they died and she didn't. Not Hamas, just an innocent little girl who's probably going to grow up to do whatever she can to avenge them. And is that her fault? No, it's the fault of all of the rules-based international order that decided that she didn't matter. "11 of one family were killed as Israel bombs Rafah overnight." Here, by the way, is the watered-down Haaretz version that says strikes on Rafah raise fear, but make sure you understand that 11 people in one family were killed, according to people on the ground. 11 people in one family, not Hamas members, but a bunch of children and a parent and a woman and their child, and everybody else involved got murdered in Rafah, where they were told to go to be safe. While they're working out a plan to keep these people safe, they murdered the people they told to keep safe. That's the truth. Over and over and over. There's really no way to misunderstand this. Abby Martin says Israel is conducting nightly bombings of homes in Rafah, where 1.3 million, between 1 and 7, depending on the numbers you're getting from different people, million Palestinians have been displaced too, killing dozens every single day. Barely any mention of this because how normalized Israel's mass murder has become. Aaron Mate points out that earlier this month, Joe Biden said that the Israeli assault on Rafah would be a red line. Remember all that big talk? Now, Biden's Pentagon is helping Israel plan the assault on Rafah. His red line is a green light. Pathetic. And if you think Trump would be any different, you are blind. Sarah Abdallah points out, don't stop talking about Rafah. quotes that shows just a graphic here, all eyes on Rafah. Just days after the UN ceasefire resolution passed, Israel's preparing to ethnically cleanse Rafah, where well over 1 million people, most of whom are children, have sought refuge. It's this impending doom that I just can't get away from right now. It's making me sad. People see it coming. Here is what whatever stupid argument we want to make about what we pretend the U.S. government is, pretending to be the moral entity in the world. Here's how they blithely disregard the obvious.
So with Netanyahu canceling this delegation and promising to go into Rafah anyway, is the U.S. taking any precautions to make sure that U.S. weapons are not going to be used in that invasion that he's promising?
So let me answer that in two ways. Number one, to say, which is, it has always been our expectation that United States weapons be used in full compliance with international humanitarian law.
The same old stupid response. We're not asking what you expect. Nobody cares about what you expect. We care about what's actually happening. You, every time that's asked, you say the same thing. We fully expect. Okay, you said that the first day, so there's been 6 months since then. Are you now still expecting that, like we're looking forward? Or have you looked back over the last 6 months of war crimes and acknowledged that they're doing that? Oh, no, well, we fully expect going forward. What do you mean going forward? This is my point, guys. It's shockingly clear to everybody anywhere. It's always been like that to most of us, I think. But at this point, what kind of answer is it to say that we expect something while we have seen it? And he responds well to this, actually. But I just think that's so insulting. This guy is a monster to me. Like, just because of the way, anybody in this position that's willing to do this, knowing what's happening, is a monster. All of them. I don't care whether you're getting paid for it, whether you have bills to pay. You are disgusting for your entire essence is about lying about genocide right now. Makes me sick.
Used in full compliance with international humanitarian law. It has always been our expectation that United States weapons be used in full compliance with international humanitarian law. I know that's a different question than what you asked, but I think it's important to put on the record. With respect to what may happen in an ultimate invasion of Rafah, I said this a little bit in response to Humera's question. I really don't want to get ahead of the facts. We do still expect to have discussions about this matter with the government of Israel. We believe there is a better way to do it. And beyond that, I don't want to speculate about what may happen down the road.
So I completely will ignore the question entirely. So what happens if they do it? Well, we're going to ignore that because you know the answer. You know the answer is we'll go along with it no matter what they do. We want you to think we care. So we're going to keep acting like we're in the conversation. He keeps acting. To this point, Netanyahu stands up and goes, we don't care what you think. We're going to do what we're going to do. He said that from the very beginning. And they act like there's some kind of dynamic going on here. They're desperate to not only not look big, but to also look like they care. And they're losing both of those battles tremendously. But imagine being this person. Imagine your entire job is to lie about genocide, to stand in front of people and literally pretend like what you're doing is fighting for the people that you're actively taking part in starving. Again, that's the point I always make. That's worse than terrorism. Terrorism is murdering people so they can murder people. You are murdering people and pretending like you're helping them. How is that not worse than average murderers? It is the most grotesque thing, and it's so transparent. Lost my place here. So we were with this one. So let's talk about what Francesca Albanese had to say. Now, of course, Orson Ostrovsky, one of the other propagandists in this constant game that they see it as, apparently, because they're lying about people's lives, says there's nothing remotely independent about, because that's the current narrative. Again, it's just so if you're paying attention, it's hilarious to me how they all just repeat the same thing. And let's not forget, they've even talked about apps, Zionist Israeli apps that tell them what they're supposed to say. They proudly talked about that. So my point is, every one of them you're going to find what their big focal point right now is, oh, she's hardly independent. Here's how she overlapped with X, Y, and Z. What does that have to do with the facts that she's presenting? Like, it's just so pathetic to me. It's all this. That is a straw man. Like, sure, look at her. The reality is, I find her to be pretty damn full of integrity based on what she's been doing. Either way, what she says can be easily backed up with facts. So all you're doing is going, look over there. Look at where she went to high school. What a gross person. Let's not talk about that. Like, it's bad. All they have, which is what that amounts to. When you dig into what they're claiming is she's secretly Hamas. That's actually what their argument is. Oh, well, she overlapped with some. Well, by the way, what she has done over her career has been overlapped with stuff going on in Palestine from the United Nations. To argue that she has any overlap with what's going on there, then somehow makes her into being Hamas is about as flimsy as everything else you're saying. That all of the UN is Hamas. The World Food Program is Hamas. All of these different journalists are all Hamas. Everything's Hamas that we don't like. And he then says, she is nothing but a tool of Hamas murderers and rapers. That's all they got, guys. That's the best argument they have. And do you think they can prove that? Do you think you have some kind of ID or passport or some kind of documentation or some kind of signed affidavit that says I'm part of Hamas? No, that's what they want the case to be. She does this. We know. Well, you don't know that. So this is an entire government apparatus laying allegations against high people in authority because of what they think. Why doesn't anybody call that out? Where's all the big high-minded entities in the journalism today that go, well, you can't prove that? How irresponsible of you to just claim that all of UNRWA is Hamas, even though you've never provided evidence, and all of your allies have said that, or claim that she supports rapists and murderers. Like, think about this for a second. She's a woman. Isn't that supposed to be insulting? Aren't you right now? What if she was raped? What if her lifetime she was raped? That's pretty common for women. Arson, are you somehow now using rape against a woman who was a victim? Like, can't you see how funny it is that people on the side of the conversation who make that about everything suddenly don't care about those things being crossed when it's Israel doing it? Okay, all that aside, obviously the point is these people are ridiculous, but let's listen to what she had to say. 27th, yesterday, telling you what we can prove. Not emotional screaming points, but what we can prove.
After 5 months of monitoring and analyzing Israel's onslaught on Gaza, my report finds that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating that Israel is committing the crime of genocide against the Palestinians as a group in Gaza has been met. The flagrant and systematic slaughter of Palestinian civilians, the deployment of unlawful weaponry, the utter obliteration of vital civilian infrastructure, including the deliberate targeting of all Gaza's hospitals, and the man-made starvation of the Palestinian people transcend the realm of war crimes and crimes against humanity that had been seen in the occupied Palestinian territory before.
Yeah, because it's not unique. It's been ongoing for a very long time. That's the reality of the situation. Here is another person, another Halil, but different person, standing up and saying, never before in the history of the United Nations did France or Germany, or have, I guess would be the right way to say that, have France or Germany condemn, or did France or Germany condemn a rapporteur for anti-Semitism. What I love about the statement is you're somehow acting like it's a precedent that's been met because you decided to condemn her for something. Like, it's not a precedent. But what's the evidence behind this? You're claiming she's a racist because she highlights things that they've done, which the rest of the world can see. All you're doing is embarrassing yourself. He says, Francesca Albanese is now the first because you just decided to make that allegation that nobody believes. He says, she says the Jewish lobby, in quotes. Are we undermined that there is no such thing? This is what's so funny to me. This is when, same thing when I think it was AOC said that Israeli lobbying groups lobby the politicians and they freaked out about that. Well, you are the ones that constantly say that Israel is the state of the Jews, that there is the same thing. Israel is Jewish people. Zionism is Judaism. Okay. So if we're talking about Israel, that means in your mind, we're talking about Jewish people, right? So if we're talking about the Jewish lobby, which in other words, you call the Israeli lobby or the Zionist lobby, we're talking about a group of political entities that actively fight for specifically things around Israel, Judaism, and okay, what are we missing? What's racist about that? That's what you describe it as. So when we talk about that, as she writes, or he says, she says, which is not even what she actually says, controls America, what we're really talking about is the fact that they're the Israeli lobby, the Zionist lobby, the Jewish lobby, very clearly and actively, publicly praising the actions of it, continue to influence policy. That's what lobbying is, guys. It shouldn't be shocking when it's made about Israeli entities. The bottom line is that they're the most powerful thing in all of this conversation. And we can watch right in front of us right now how they influence the opinions of people that are either too dumb to know any better or are willing to take the money. Israel, he goes on to say, Israel commits genocide, as if that's one of the things that are shocking. How dare you, despite the fact that the World Court said it has merit, and cries out from the river to the sea. Oh, yeah? Is that what she did? How about we listen? And what she actually said was, there will be equal rights. They didn't even say for one side or the other from the river to the sea. But now, because anybody says it other than somebody who is Israeli, then you're a racist. Even though the Likud party's founding charter says exactly that about Israel, but it's only racist in one way because you guys are ridiculous hypocrites. But I'll make some points about this. Here's what he has to say about it.
Following nearly 6 months of
And I'm sorry, it is pretty low, so turn it up.
unrelenting Israeli assault on occupied Gaza, it is my solemn duty to report on the worst of what humanity is capable of.
The worst of what humanity is capable of. You're damn right.
And to present my finding, the anatomy of a genocide. The colonial amnesia of the West has condoned Israel's colonial settler project from the violent history of the very birth of the State of Israel.
I mean, and by the way, he's cutting this rapidly because if you actually watch the entire thing, it's everything we've already gone over. And even then, what is he showing you? Are those supposed to be damning points? It's factual evidence that anybody can prove. Colonial settlerism, the violent occupation. I mean, the entire world, the world court ruled that they have committed genocide, guys. It's crazy that we're pretending not. And yet the best that can be done here is to be outraged about stating those facts. And then, of course, making those facts racist. Am I missing anything?
People around the world are taking to the streets, gathering, protesting, and demanding equal rights of all, from the river to the sea.
See, right there. Equal rights for all from the river to the sea. And yet he calls that racist. He calls that some kind of blood libel. Why? Because you're not allowed to ask for freedom or self-determination or equal rights for one side of this conversation. And that's supposed to be the not racist argument. But and the racist argument is to suggest that Palestinians should be equal. Am I missing something? What he's saying.
The Israeli project is not only apartheid, but aims at a final solution.
Again, they cut, right? Now again, all he showed you that was is to make you go, oh, they're leaning into the Nazi argument. Well, they didn't see that, did they? What she said was it's an apartheid, which every leading human rights group in the world says it is, even B'Tselem, which is an Israeli group, and argues this final solution, which is what they're doing to Palestinians. These are terms that have meaning, not unique to Nazis. Guys, the bottom line is what they're talking about here is what we can all see, and all he's doing is compiling these things in a weirdly selective way to try to make you think that they're all racist. And in fact, it's working against them.
Crimes against humanity, genocide.
Right there. So because you said genocide, you're supposed to pretend that's racist. That's the no-no word, despite all the evidence.
Now give the floor to the United Nations Watch.
Of course, I actually missed that. Of course, it's United Nations Watch. UN Watch, in my opinion, is not the same as the UN. It's a group that is very slanted and has come out and made very clear pro-Israel arguments the entire time. That's my opinion. You listen for yourself.
Ms. Albanese, your report accuses Israel of genocide. Now at page 2.
No, it finds they committed genocide based on the facts, and the World Court backs that. But let's listen to your screams because that's going to be more important.
2, you say your report does not examine the Hamas crimes of October 7th because they are, quote, beyond the geographic scope of my mandate.
Now, what he's trying to do here is make a soundbite to make people only hear what he's saying and act like this is some kind of trumped moment. People underneath it are saying, oh, he ended her career. Okay, let's be very clear. And I think anybody with a brain already knows this. Her mandate was specifically about whether there was genocide happening in Gaza. It had nothing to do with October 7th. Other than the idea, and by the way, she's already condemned Hamas like 45 times because of October 7th. Look it up. And yet they just act like it's not true because they're desperate to sell you a certain narrative. The point is she was given a task to find out in her assessment whether there was genocide. Whether or not Israel's committing genocide has no bearing on why it's happening because Hamas is there. Now, if you went into there and found out that they weren't doing things that constitute genocide because Hamas was holding everybody in front of them or because they were all using schools, even then, by the way, there's still not a valid argument for that. But that's not what she found. The evidence does not show Hamas is using human shields. The evidence does not show that they're using all the hospitals and schools. The evidence shows exactly what you might think, that they're indiscriminately bombing all of them, like all of the times they've admitted that, all the times they've posted that, like all the times their politicians have claimed that. You know, shocking, right? Like we can't see that. But he starts by saying, you make this statement. She didn't make that statement. That's the static reality of what they were doing. But see, he's hoping people don't know that because he's, in my opinion, very clearly dishonest, or he's that stupid in this conversation, not knowing the basic reality. But I think it's obvious. So now, based on the fact that you said you weren't going to look into it, is what he says.
Now, you went on a recent official trip to Australia, all expenses paid by the UN. Could you explain how Australia is within the geography of your mandate, but not the mass murder, rape, torture committed by Hamas terrorists on October 7th?
Mass rape, murder, and torture? Pretty sure there's not even a mass murder, quite frankly, when you understand all the dynamics of the IDF. Clearly, the rape has not been proven. There's basically evidence about that. We've got one person in a New York Times article now that is apparently a public entity that, like I said, same with a bunch of other people that are being honest about it. Well, we should engage it honestly. Maybe she was. It wouldn't surprise me, which is what I've said from the very beginning. Still, yet there is no proof. That's any honest journalist, no matter how insulting that may be to somebody. Torture? So now we're going on to say there's mass torture? Well, all we have is a bunch of bloody scenes that were left after the IDF went through the area and have lied about damn near everything they found. Doesn't that seem to flavor that with a little bit of doubt? But it doesn't matter. Rape, burned bodies, beheaded children, they just keep saying it to this very day, even though their corporate media themselves have exposed those as lies. Even the Zaka guy, Electronic Intifada, just wrote an article about it. Now, I wouldn't say that he admitted he lied, but what he says in that interview very clearly shows you that he did. Both because he admits that they're 18, 20, not children, but also when he tries to talk about what he was showing him as the baby, he very clearly is lying. I mean, watch it. It's obvious. And by the way, you don't even need to say that because it's already been debunked by 14 different newspapers and investigators. But that's what he's got.
The UN. Could you explain how...
Oh, and I would say the Australia point. I mean, I don't remember how that plays into it, but quite frankly, are we pretending that she's not allowed to go somewhere else, or the idea that there might be other things involved? Or who knows? Maybe there was a source she had to speak to in Australia. The idea that you're only hyper-focused on the idea that you not look in the one location that did not have any bearing on what your mandate was is just to try to make a manipulative point to make you think she ignored them. She's been very public about this, and I talked about it the first time this came up. He's just lying.
Australia is within the geography of your mandate, but not the mass murder, rape, torture committed by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, invading Israel from Gaza, kidnapping hundreds of hostages, including babies and Holocaust survivors.
Why is it more relevant to their Holocaust survivors? It's not. It's just another person that is, if it's a crime, it's a crime. It's not an extra crime because they're a Holocaust survivor. That's just another kind of emotional point that's being laid over the top. And the bottom line is she's already spoken about this. And that is all, as insofar as that is part of the investigation, it's already done. That stuff happened. It's investigated. We know that. So now let's look at what's happening in Gaza. It's already happened. Again, he's just a dishonest person.
If you ignore the Hamas massacre that started the war, the 14,000
she didn't
rockets fired against Israeli towns.
Which again, the idea that you're going to pretend that 14,000 rockets, that 99% of which hit an open field or did not cause any damage, or even the fact that it's being some of them coming from Lebanon, like none of that has anything to do with what they're doing to people in Gaza. Like that's the same point.
130 hostages now being tortured in Gaza.
Oh, now they're all being tortured? I mean, think if you're being this flimsy with things that you can't prove, come on. It's quite obvious this person is trying to be manipulative.
How can you possibly understand the war? Now, though you say it's not in your mandate, you have commented. On February 10th, you mocked the statement of President Macron that October 7th constituted the greatest anti-Semitic massacre of our century. You said the victims were, quote, not killed because of their Judaism, but rather in reaction to Israel's oppression.
Yeah, you're just not allowed to say that. The fact. One of these obvious facts that you're just not allowed to discuss. Now, have they presented any evidence to suggest that we can prove that it was only about Judaism? No. They've only presented their very slanted, emotional, racist narrative. That's it. And they've all backed it by other people in power. That's it. So why is it outrageous that she says she thinks otherwise when you have never presented any evidence? That's a simple reality. And on top of that, why are we to say that it's a big focused only like an ethnic cleansing massacre when most of the people they engaged with, they didn't even kill until the later days they let them go? I just think about how crazy this is. And again, it's only going to outrage people that don't understand the full dynamic of what happened. All the IDF killings, the Hannibal Directive, and all the examples we now have of how most of these people seem to have been shot by the IDF. But you could disagree with that because evidence is still being fleshed out. But if you're pretending that no people were shot by the IDF, you're ignoring your own people's testimony. Plenty of Israelis, plenty of helicopter pilots, plenty of tank drivers. The colonel himself said it was a mass Hannibal. But all we can do is pretend like you're ignoring one side of the story by looking at the full picture. They weren't killed because they were Jews. The reality is obvious that this was an act of armed resistance, And yes, there were crimes committed around it, but the act of armed resistance is legally protected, and they've said that from day one. And also, and on top of that, Hamas funded by Israel and the fact that they saw it coming and did nothing. Let's just ignore all that too, right?
Because of their Judaism, but rather in reaction to Israel's oppression. In response, for the first time in history, both France and Germany.
And then condemn you for anti-Semitism. That's it. That's all it is. For the first time, he's trying to make a big splashy moment about, oh, we're condemning you for anti. I don't think she cares at all. You can watch her response. Actually, I'll skip to that. That just so it's clear, that's really all he's saying. Just that we all condemn you for the first time in history, your anti-Semitic nature.
Deny their anti-Semitic nature. Germany said, Madam Rapporteur, your remarks were a disgrace. We agree.
Yeah, because Germany's completely not compromised, right? I mean, Germany is so blindly adherent to whatever is seen as against anti-Semitism, it just doesn't even matter. I mean, that they've been the one group, and by the way, it does not align with their population. It's the government that is completely taken over by whatever Zionist agenda they decide to push that day.
I must recall that all discourteous words.
So I'll read this because it's very quiet. What the woman is saying in response to that, in defense of Francesca Albanese, is I must recall that all discourteous words or attacks on mandate holders like her are unacceptable. I mean, there's just no place for it. Like, what this is a data. You could argue she's wrong or lying, but what they're doing is trying to make an emotional, manipulative point. And I think everybody saw right through it. It's about you people listening and watching that don't know any better. That's what they're aiming at. I'm not even pointing anybody indirectly or specifically. Somebody out there that would be like that. And it says, in particular, against Special Rapporteur. In this instance, so her. The comments and their terminology must be of respect and dignity and must be upheld scrupulously. So the bottom line is, what she's saying is, that's not what you did. Now, she's stating what she's stating based on facts and very measured, no emotion, no outrage and emotional, no name calling. And this is what's so interesting when you stand back and look at it. Now, you could argue that she secretly hates Jews, and that's why really we know that, but you have nothing to back it up. So the argument is she's very measured and calmly presenting facts. So you could disagree with them. He comes over the top and emotionally responds and says, you're racist. We condemn you in the strongest possible terms because you claim genocide. You claim this. My point is, all you're doing is pointing out the things that she claims she factually found. You could argue you're wrong, but to come after it like an emotional outrage point and say you're a racist, again, if you can't see it by now, is literally the only thing they have from the Zionist manipulative position against anybody. Even those that are mostly on their side that barely step out of line, they get attacked. Pretty damn transparent. Now here is a clip I've played before. Gideon Levy, who's an Israeli journalist, but I just like this clip. It's powerful, especially as we're talking about the idea of occupation, the idea of international law, and what that truly means. And in this sense, what he's saying is he's never seen an occupier in history present itself as a victim until Israeli government.
Give the three principles which enable us Israelis to live so easily with this brutal reality. A, most of the Israelis, if not all of them, deeply believe that we are the chosen people.
When he says, sorry, I should have prefaced it, but the reality he's talking about is the occupation, the apartheid, the suffering of Palestinians, and being okay with that. That's what he's talking about. And he's explaining why, not all, but many Israelis believe that hurting them is okay. And he goes on to explain why.
I'll just give the three principles which enable us Israelis to live so easily with this brutal reality. A, most of the Israelis, if not all of them, deeply believe that we are the chosen people. And if we are the chosen people, we have the right to do whatever we want. B, there were more brutal occupations in history. There were even longer occupations in history, even though the Israeli occupation gets to quite a nice record. But there was never in history an occupation in which the occupier presented himself as the victim. Not only the victim, the only victim around. This also enables any Israeli to live in peace because we are the victims. The other day, Professor Falk spoke about this dual strategy of Israel of being a victim.
So now we have two vaccines.
On the other hand, after what happened in
Sorry about that. I bumped a button.
Paris and in Copenhagen with the terror attacks, Benjamin Netanyahu came with the notion all the Jews must come to Israel. It's the safest place for the Jews in the world. It's a shelter for the Jews in the world, which is wrong because Israel is today the most dangerous place on earth for Jews. But
there it is. It's, you know, and that's the crazy. It's not shocking, guys. It's just that people in power are afraid to say that because they're either compromised or influenced by the Zionist agenda. I mean, it's a static, obvious reality. It's clear, and it's objectively clear based on all the information we can see, right? What they have caused and what they do actively create the situations that they then point at to justify their very presence. Zionism.
Let's put it aside. It was only 24 hours later when he said Israel is an existential threat under the Iranian bomb. And I asked myself, how can you dare call Jews to come and to join this suicidal project when the Iranians are going to bomb us?
Right. I mean, it's a very obvious point. If you're threatening, if you're saying Iran is about to kill everybody, why are you telling everyone to come here to be safe? Because it's about the idea that you're putting them in positions to be unsafe, so you can then point at them and say, we need to exist because we protect them. You're manufacturing the threat to protect them from. Now, what I've read about over the years is that Zionist leaders, they really thought they could manage this, especially since they were funding and they thought controlling these entities. Clearly, the point is that didn't happen. And there's other groups involved that are influenced by them. And I just think they lost control of this very clearly, obviously, today.
But in Israel, everything goes, and both declarations were accepted as the only truth. And here I get to the third set of values which enable us Israelis to live in peace with the occupation. And this is maybe the most crucial one and the worst one. We say victimization, we say chosen people. When I say victimization, it goes without saying we have to mention the Holocaust and the unforgettable Mrs. Golda Meir that the American jury had exported to Israel. She said once, this unforgettable woman, that after the Holocaust, the Jews have the right to do whatever they want. But the third set of values is the most dangerous one, and this is the systematic dehumanization of the Palestinians, which enable us Israelis to live in peace with everything, because if they are not human beings like us, then there is not really a question of human rights. And if you scratch under the skin of almost every Israeli, you will find it there. Almost no one will treat the Palestinians as equal human beings like us.
And that's coming from an Israeli Jew. He's telling you that because he knows that. He's lived there. But what's important to understand, in my opinion at least, and I mean, I've heard him speak about the same thing, that it's not all-encompassing, but it's very clear that the vast majority of people in the population have been raised to think that these people are not human, to think that if they hurt them, if they take from them, that they're justified in doing so, that it's actually protecting themselves. It's the world narrative they use. Their violence is self-defense in the minds of people that they've raised up in this Zionist manipulation. But it's important to think about this. It's not every Jewish person, especially outside of Israel. Now, there's a lot of Jewish people that don't live in Israel. In fact, it's probably the majority if you look around the world. But the idea is that there's a lot of them that have come to think that that's what they've come from there somehow, or, whatever it is. But overall, it's because of the Zionist manipulation of Jews, specifically in Israel, to make them think that over 75 years that's the reality. The same thing I point out about warmongering of Americans because of the U.S. government convincing them that it's about freedom. It's the same game. I mean, or even more so specifically about using Christianity from a political perspective to get people to think that it's the same. People use these things every day. The fact that we haven't been able to notice this of Zionism and over Judaism all this time is indicative of the power structures they've influenced. That's what it really is. But he is telling you as plain as day. And I always point out Abby Martin's work in that regard because she did the due diligence. She went there on the ground and she spoke to people. And the testimony that she got, and you see some of it today when that woman screaming, "No, Arabs allowed here, kill you all!" Like that, she's putting the hand across her neck. We've seen that video. Or there's a lot of them. It's openly expressed. And today, more and more by even their leadership.
I once wrote that we treat the Palestinians like animals, and I got so many protest letters from animal rights organizations, rightly so. But by the end of the day, how many Israelis did ever try for a moment to put themselves in the place of the Palestinians for a moment, for one day? And I want to give you two examples which will demonstrate it. Many years ago, I interviewed then candidate for Prime Minister Ehud Barak. And I asked him a question which I try to ask in any occasion. Mr. Barak, what would have happened if you would have been born Palestinian? And Barak gave me then the only honest answer he could give me. He said I would have joined a terror organization. What else would have he done? Would he become a poet? He doesn't know to write poems. Would he become a pianist? He's quite a bad pianist, and I doubt if he would have become a collaborator because he is a fighter.
And that's the main point that they never want you to think about. It's the same point that anybody logical will make, that if you grow up in an area where you're oppressed your entire life and you only have a few options, what are you going to, and you want to fight for your own independence, you're going to join a group like this. And it's not because, I mean, it's really out of years. Like, imagine you watch your family get murdered. You watch your parents somebody gets raped in front of you. You watch your home get demolished 3 times over your lifetime, right? You grew up in a mindset that you want to make them pay for what they've done. And again, if you think that's not actively part of the Zionist agenda to create the very thing that they point at to fight against, just like we've seen the U.S. and Israel fund the most radical elements of that situation all over the Middle East. In Syria, they funded Hamas. It's the same point. They're trying to do that. Now, again, that doesn't mean they have control over everything. They just dump money in the dangerous people's laps to hope that they can push back against the groups that don't want to work with them. The moderate ones, the ones that actually care about human values and human rights, but the ones they pretend they're fighting for that while they fund the crazy ones that push them back. All right. Well, oh no, I'm in the middle of the clip. I've played that clip before where, it just tells you that that's what we do. We fund the crazies, right? It's obvious. And the worst part is they all know that. Most every one of them, including the people at the two-party screaming sides that pretend that that's not the truth.
And it became a scandal. Because how can you dare to put Ehud Barak to think what would have happened if he would have become a Palestinian? And the second incident, briefly, Second Intifada, the city of Jenin, the most closed city in the West Bank, real total siege. I go out from Jenin, I come to the checkpoint, a Palestinian ambulance is parking there with the red lights. I stand after him, no cars can get out of Jenin in those days, no cars can get in, and I wait. The soldiers are playing Vagabond in the tent. Usually I know myself, it's better that I don't get into confrontation with the soldiers because it always ends up very badly. So I stayed in the car, but after 40 minutes I couldn't take it. And I went out to the car. From the car, I went first to the Palestinian ambulance driver and I asked him, what's going on? He told me that's the routine. They let me wait 1 hour until they come and check the ambulance.
God damn it.
And I couldn't take it anymore. And I went to the soldiers. It became a confrontation. But the question that I asked them, which really brought them to direct their weapons toward me, was one. What would have happened if your father would have been lying in this ambulance? This freaked them out. They lost control. How can I dare to compare between their father and the Palestinian in the ambulance? And this set of beliefs that they are not human beings like us enable us, Israelis, to live in so much peace with those crimes, ongoing crime for so many years, with losing any kind of humanity, values. I heard today people talk about Jewish values. I must be frank with you, I don't know what are Jewish values. I know what are universal values.
Thank you.
Let's not get into it, really.
It's just about being a human being, guys. It's about caring about human life. That's the side I stand on. I don't stand on arbitrary lines drawn by political games that make you compromise your integrity and beliefs based on certain talking points of the day. I side with people who care about human life, who care about the truth at every other expense in the context of what we're doing. Right? Money, growth, engagement, clout. which shocking, right? Is weird that shouldn't that be the point of people in this position, that that's all we truly care about? But that's sadly not the reality. Now, Prem Tacker, make sure I didn't miss that. Yeah, this other person pointing out, the Center for American Progress President Patrick Gaspard says the State Department claim that Israel is following international law is, quote, a gross disregard of overwhelming evidence. You see how obvious this is? Gaspard has served as DNC executive director and in Obama's administration, including as ambassador to South Africa, which, of course, to some people on the Republican side is going to make them ignore the entire thing, which is how this is supposed to work, right? Instead of just being like, who cares what his political side is? What are the facts, right? What's the reality of the situation? Are we going to ignore everything he says because Obama? Or are we going to realize that he's simply, for whatever reason, standing up and saying they know what's going on? You realize he's saying this about the Democrat side of the conversation. He's saying this about Biden's administration. He's saying they know what they're doing. They're all breaking the law. They all see it and they don't care. That should be big news no matter what political game you think people are playing. Here is Dr. Mads Gelbert telling you the same point about international law.
Anybody who knows international law, anybody who knows so much history, they know that the Palestinians are entitled, like any occupied people, to fight against occupation with arms. Of course, within the limits of the international conventions.
And that's the only point that matters in that conversation, right? There is a thing as armed resistance, as much as they all pretend like that's not true. And that means that you can act violently against your occupier, but there are conventions that you can't walk, you can't break it, you can't fight civilians, you can't kidnap. It's all this, and many of which did happen. I've never been unclear about that. But the game is about pretending like we only care. Like that means you only want to rape people and kill civilians. It's like, even though you expressly say the opposite, the point is that's the only argument they have, is to try to pretend like you hate Jews, you're racist, and you want to kill civilians. It's not true. In my experience, it's the, I've honestly not talked to one person who is standing up and saying, I fight for Palestinian self-determination or free Palestine or river to the sea, God forbid. I haven't talked to one of them that believes that I'll put it this way. Every single one of them want equality, ceasefire, all of it. It applies to both sides. They want people they want a two-state solution. They want all civilians to be safe. And that's what they mean when they call for it. But inherently, because of the mindset of the Israelis today, they hear those things and they inherently take them as attacks on what they want. And so they make it out to be, you hate them. It's not at all what they said. But you see how that works? And that, in some people's minds, is just the way their brain works, but it's a manipulation of a Zionist government. The international law is plainly clear, and what they did was protected under international law, no matter what you want to say about it. Crimes committed around it were still crimes.
The Geneva Convention, the Hague Convention, and the rules of war. Should not the Palestinian people have the same right as the Ukrainian people? Or the Norwegian people, when we for 5 years were fighting the Germans who occupied us? They called us terrorists.
Yep.
We were fighting with arms against the German occupation army. That was completely legal. And then we made some mistakes. The Palestinians may be making some mistakes. Then they should be prosecuted and taken to the international courts, of course.
There's very few people making these arguments, guys. And no doesn't matter what, like, my opinion is, it's showing one of two things right here. When you see somebody doing this is my opinion based on the very objective stance he's taking, which seems to contradict every side. To me, I'm thinking this guy's an honest person. Doesn't mean maybe he's wrong about things. Maybe he missed this. Maybe he didn't see COVID. Who knows? The point is, when you're standing up making this argument, it's not left or right. It's down the facts. It's again, I'm making this exact argument. I see very few people who are making that argument, whether because they're too afraid to be called an anti-Semite or whatever it is. All I want you to begin to highlight is that people that are doing that are either trying to say these things because they want you to think they are, or that they are. In any case, what they're saying is correct. And there's very few people making that very important argument right now.
Of course, I'm against any terror against civilians, but I 100% support the Palestinian people's right to resist occupation with weapons, just like the Ukrainian people and any other occupied people. Totally.
And now, of course, they're going to make him out to be a racist for saying that, which is already happening. Oh, you support rapists and you support killing civilians? Yeah. Did he say that? It's just, it's almost not even worth engaging anymore because it's clearly a dishonest stance. You're coming from a place where you're assuming, or they're not saying it, you say it anyway, what they're actually wink, wink saying behind what the words they actually said are. And that's just stupid. But there's a lot of mainstream journalists that are pretty stupid. Now, this is from 2023, from November. And this was in a Hebrew article version of Amnesty International, by the way. There is no safe place in the Gaza Strip. Israeli attacks legality demonstrate blatant contempt for Palestinian life. They're just making you understand what they're doing is blatant. They don't care about the civilians on the ground, and everything they're doing from the beginning to now and well before that is showing you that. Here's the one I showed you from October 20th. Damning evidence of war crimes. Israeli attacks wipe out entire families. This was just between October 7th and 12th. And they proved 5 different examples that they targeted civilians, didn't try to warn them, and the most important is just chose to kill them without any reason to. Which, by the way, is what 972 magazine broke down, a mass assassination factory with 6 former and current IDF sources who said, we just killed people to kill people. We took down buildings, just take down buildings. But who cares about the facts, right? Here's another Hebrew language Amnesty International article. New evidence of illegal Israeli attacks in Gaza that have caused mass harm to civilians against the backdrop of widespread risk to Rafah residents in the face of expected attack. You remember when one of these used to hold so much weight in the world, but of course, because it's Israel, we ignore it all right now? Well, here is a really great question put to Mr. Matt Miller. Asked about Israeli assurances. How is Israel not violating international law? Especially with everything we just showed you. The proof, world conversation, the undeniable reality of what's happening on the ground. But here is your gaslighting U.S. government that wants you to pretend they're fighting for good things as they support genocide.
And just on the assurances, earlier you said after receiving assurances from Israel that they're not violating humanitarian law, the U.S. so far has not seen proof of that. Wondering what these assurances look like, because, we have all seen proof from the International Court of Justice, from the United Nations, and from footage, especially the past few weeks, over and over again, of Israel seemingly targeting civilians, hospitals, churches, footage even yesterday showing Israeli forces seeming to execute unarmed Palestinians.
Isn't this silly? Just have to stop. Isn't that just silly? Like, it's I get being objective, and I'm with you. I get why he's doing it this way, but just acknowledge that what you're doing, laying out unbelievably obvious evidence, killing people, burning buildings, showing blood, right, 4 times, and then just now. And how do you think that the question being that we haven't proven that this is happening yet? It just where's the burden of proof here? At what point do we go, okay, it's very obvious? I mean, it just gets ridiculous because this is how this game is supposed to be played when you're in this room. I get it, but that's the point. It's broken. These people have maybe some of the individuals. I know that there's plenty of them in this room that actively, in my opinion, do fight for the truth. But from the State Department level, we know that their inherent job is not to let the truth out. But it's just so effing frustrating, isn't it? When everything he's describing is so transparent. We just showed you a member of everybody across the board, United Nations, human rights groups, people within the government. There's now been another State Department representative that has resigned at a protest because they all know that. And don't forget, we just showed you, they know. The Biden administration is aware that they're violating the law. They just don't care.
Targeting civilians, footage, especially the past few weeks, over and over again, of Israel seemingly targeting civilians, hospitals, churches, footage even yesterday showing Israeli forces seeming to execute unarmed Palestinians waving white flags. They're blocking aid to the point that the U.S. is trying to build a pier to deliver aid as if Israel is a belligerent and not an ally. So with all this, how is Israel not violating humanitarian law? Are these assurances just Israel saying that they promise they're not, and they evidently continue to do so?
Look at his smile. The point is, we obviously all know that. Now go ahead and lie to us, Matt. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
I spoke to this extensively on Monday and Tuesday, and I would encourage you to check the transcript. I'll do a little bit of it again, but I think I will spare everyone else here 15 or 20 minutes of me in vain on the national security memo again. But what I will say is, we received assurances from the government of Israel that are consistent.
Same answer. That's the same thing he says. We've received assurances that what they're doing. He just laid out the points. This, they're doing that, they're doing this. We've seen that evidence. We've seen them do that. So your point is, we've stressed that they have to be doing that. We've raised the issue. I mean, I've quite frankly never seen it like this. I've always known that they're obfuscating. I've always seen them. They have nothing to do. They have nothing to say. They literally have nothing to say. The evidence is clear. The world sees it. They know we see it. They know they see it. Now it's all been clear. And the best he can do is this ridiculous answer.
Security memo again. But what I will say is we received assurances from the government of Israel that are consistent with the requirements of the national security memo. Now, but I think
which, by the way, all that really has to mean is whatever we wrote down on the national security memo, which means they have to say this to us. Well, they met the requirements of the memo. That's not what we're asking about, man. We're asking about whether they violate international law, not whether some arbitrary memo you stuck between those two things is some step they're supposed to reach to be able to make you say that they met that. It's a game. This is desperation by people that know that we all see what they're doing. And that's what makes me so sick about this, that this means nothing. People are dying while you're doing this.
Your underlying question, we look at those assurances through a lens of the ongoing processes that we have to answer this very question. And we do have questions. So
let's do this again. This is funny.
But I think to your underlying question, we look at those assurances through a lens of the ongoing processes that we.
So we look through we look at these assurances through the lens of ongoing processes.
We have to answer this
to answer the question. So you have a question about assurances that you look at through the processes of the question. That's what he said.
Very question. And we do have processes going on.
We do have process questions.
Examining specific incidents in the conduct of the campaign.
I mean, I don't even know how to pretend this is not the stupidest thing ever. He lost it. This guy's usually pretty good at this. He lost it. He lost his thread. He just rambling. And the bottom line is what you ultimately said was we have assurances. So they promised us, they pinky swore that they wouldn't do that. And that we looked at these things with them and we're doing that. That was his answer.
And those processes are ongoing. They've not reached a final determination at this point.
Oh, so we haven't concluded. Is it a 7-month process or is it an 8-month process? Or was, what's the processes going on here? 6, 7, 5. I mean, I think about how dumb that is after 5+ months of constant murder and them continuing to raise the issue. And we've been given assurances. This was stupid on the first week. This was stupid on the first couple of days after ongoing murder was continuing. And all they had to say was, well, we spoke to them about it. That's why this guy's laughing at them, because it's embarrassing. Now a State Department official has resigned. Another one over what they're doing in Gaza. I think this is really important. A human rights official has resigned from the U.S. State Department over Gaza, saying the Biden administration is flouting U.S. law by continuing to arm Israel, because that's what's happening, and is hushing up evidence that the U.S. had seen on Israeli human rights abuses. So Anil Shalin, this person here, has resigned, the second now person from the State Department, and she has said she hopes to have an influence on policy by staying at her post, or she had hoped that, which is usually how people are, all credit to her for trying, but naively think that you can work from within this broken system. And of course, I'll start over. I thought I could pick it up. She said she had hoped to have influence on the policy by staying in her position in the Near Eastern section of the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, taking part in discussions, signing dissent cables, like they care about that, right? Signing on the cables going, I disagree. They do it anyway. Raising her concerns with her supervisors. Nobody cared. But she had lost confidence that she could do anything about it, so she resigned in protest, specifically the flow of U.S. arms to Israel. Quote, the fundamental reason was I no longer wanted to be affiliated with this administration. I have a younger daughter. She's not yet 2. But if someday in the future she's learning about this and knows that I was at the State Department and she asked me what I did about it, I want to be able to tell her that I did what I could. Exactly. This is that moment, guys. People will look back and say, what did you do to stop the Holocaust? That's what this will be. Shailene is only the second State Department official to resign over U.S. I love how they say, she's only the second one. Right, because it's really common to have 2 people resign in the State Department in a 5-month period over one policy. People, it's just so gross how they're in the smallest ways trying to downplay this stuff. There are levels and there's levers and strings on every piece of these journals across the world, guys. And it's not some Jewish point. It's about Zionism. And the bottom line is it's very clear that they have influence over these platforms, making them write opinion pieces. It's obvious and it's painful. Only the second person. Look up the precedent on that and laugh about that with me. And it says, to resign over the policy on the Gaza war. Another left, which will play for you. But she said that many of her colleagues had told her that they would resign if they could afford to lose their job, which that's how this usually goes, and had urged her to speak out about her reasons for quitting rather than leave quietly. The 38-year-old who studied the foreign policy of Arab governments for her doctorate said the State Department was aware of plenty of evidence that Israel was violating international law in its conduct of the Gaza war, and that the Biden administration was violating U.S. law by continuing to supply weapons. So the clear point, somebody who was in the State Department, who in fact has a doctorate in Arab in government, which is interesting because if what we're being told by Israel and the U.S. government is true, wouldn't she be the other side of this argument? That she really knows what Arab governments are all about and she wants to... No, see, she truly knows the history of this, not what the Zionist government says, and she understands the reality and recognizes what's going on and resigned to protest. And the point is, she's telling you at the State Department that she saw with her own eyes, they have, quote, plenty of evidence that Israel was violating international law and that Biden was too in domestic law, which is what we've been saying. She pointed in particular to the Leahy laws, which you've also pointed to, which forbid assistance to foreign military units implicated in atrocities. And Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act, which states that no assistance should be given to any government which, quote, prohibits or otherwise restricts, directly or indirectly, the transport or delivery of United States humanitarian assistance. Hey, look, it doesn't matter whether it's indirect or direct. It's in spades, guys. It is everywhere. It's the most obvious part of this, maybe save for their intent, that they are blocking aid, praising that, and actively stopping it. I mean, literally, Elon Levy lost his job for pushing back against David Cameron at the wrong moment about those lies, which means he lied about human aid and got fired because of that. And the point, they've been caught by everybody. Kogat's been caught lying about bakeries. Elon Levy's been caught lying about the location of the camp and the bakeries. They've been caught manufacturing lies about aid trucks coming through when the UN, UNICEF, they all called them out. I'll show you more as we end. But it says on Monday, the State Department said it had received assurances from Israel. It's right there. Not surprising, since that's Matt Miller. We got assurances and, quote, not found them to be in violation of international law. That is actually what the government is claiming. We don't find them to be in violation of international law. Didn't they just ignore a UN resolution? Aren't they being caught on video using human shields? Aren't they actively bombing civilians under the guise that there's bad people there, which, by the way, is collective punishment? Aren't they starving an entire group of people with an open siege that they stated publicly? I mean, you guys are cartoons. I mean, this is what's so crazy about this. They are very clearly showing the world that there is nothing that bounds what they claim they're doing. What do you think that's going to do to the other people that, I was going to say the worst, but the second worst people of the world? Well, they're going to go, well, we're going to do the same thing. They don't care. Everyone sees they're doing whatever they want. No one's stopping them. So it's kind of like when they point to that, we're causing that. They're actively doing that. It says the law is clear here, and we do have evidence, but the specifics are just not being followed. Excuse me, that's what she said. I thought that was going on what they said. The bottom line is she's saying they are not following the specifics. But we shouldn't need that to prove it. Again, one of the biggest points is they're blocking aid. They are proudly saying that in many cases, and that's a violation of domestic law. So no matter how you spin this, no matter how you cut it, they're criminals. On Monday, the State Department said it had received assurances. That's all you get. Well, we told them, we raised the issue, and they swore. They gave me a pinky swear. They promised. The State Department said it's reviewing evidence of civilian harm under mechanisms established by the Biden administration last year, weeks before the Gaza war broke out. But Sheline said that the results of those investigations would only be made public when the White House wanted them to be. Of course. It's just so transparent. Here's the State Department official that resigned before that. Oh my God, this is getting so frustrating. So there's something wrong with, I didn't want to bring it up this whole time. Let me see if I can do it this way. There's something wrong with now StreamYard, which won't let me upload these videos. I guess I can do it this way. Give me a second. Guys, I swear, I don't even tell you 90% of the stuff that's going on in the background. because I just don't want to bother you with it. It's so constant, and it's not like I'm complaining. I swear to you, I know there's things happening that are not glitches, but we'll leave it alone.
We have to condemn the atrocities that happen every day to Palestinians in the West Bank. You mentioned sexual violence. I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Mosque Bia in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believe they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. We are looking at a situation where there is so much dehumanification, where people are not seen.
Now, the only difference is I have to upload them on the sidebar here, which takes a second. I don't know why. Every time I try to upload a video where I normally do, it just says that there's an error. Call StreamYard. That's what it says. Great. Well, let's go forward. Here is Francesca Albanese adding to that point, right? We played that before. The reality that they, instead of going after the rapists, the child rapists, they arrest and shut down and call terrorists the people that expose the child rapists in the IDF and in the Israeli side of the conversation. That's again, an open secret. And we've done 14 different segments on that. The history around that and the reality. Even today, I showed you some clips. So here's what she says to add to that. I lost count of how many renowned journalists interviewed me on the alleged mistreatment of sexual abuse against Palestinian women by Israeli forces and never published any article about this. It's overwhelmingly obvious. And again, the person highlighting the fact that they are alarmed regarding the amount of information, the evidence coming from the UN showing what they're actually doing to detainees in Israel. Well, here's another person speaking, and just making fun of how dumb the stance is currently at the State Department. And here's Mick Wallace. Well, actually, I'll say that after the fact. Let me see if I have this son of a gun. Give me a second. I'm going to guess this won't upload as well. We'll find out. Damn it, man. Hold on. I guess I'll start doing this in the background now, seeing if I have to upload every one of them to the sidebar before I can play every video right now. Here you go.
Number one, when it comes to dictating, you're right. No, we do not dictate to them. We can't dictate to them. They're a sovereign country, and the United States can't dictate to any sovereign country. They're going to make their own decisions, and they have been quite clear about that, and we would expect nothing less from any sovereign country. That said, we always offer our best advice to them. We have done that from the beginning. You've heard the president talk about that when he went to Israel just a week after, or a little over a week after October 7th, where he talked about the fact that because Israel is such a longtime friend, we are going to offer advice about them, oftentimes colored by the mistakes that we have made and the experiences that we have learned from mistakes that we have made in our past and how we have conducted military operations. And so we try. Very good advice. And so we try. We try to give them that advice in terms of the options that we will present to them, or that I assume we will present to them at some point. I wouldn't think of it as military planning. We're going to offer them, and I also don't want to preview too much in detail publicly, because these are still conversations that ought to happen privately. But the intent would be to give them advice about how to conduct such operations. It's not to do actual military planning, for example, what to do when, how, with that level of specificity. When I talk about we're not involved in military planning, that's what I mean. We're not in with them planning exact military operations, but we have always offered them advice about what we have believed the best way to go about this operation is. That's true going back to some of the first meetings that we had in Israel right after October 7th.
Well, then either one of two things. Either you gave very bad advice because you have 30,000 civilians who got killed, or they didn't listen to your advice. So what about Rafah? You think they would? Are they actually listening to what you're saying? Because they said, if we don't have the U.S. on board, we're going it alone.
So they will speak for themselves, but we have not yet had the meeting where we outline the steps that we believe that they ought to take.
Yeah, but they're currently bombing children right now. But we'll let that keep happening until we work out this fake plan. It's just embarrassing. Well, maybe you either gave them bad advice or you didn't listen to you. Well, yeah, obviously. That's transparent to anybody with a brain or a couple of brain cells to rub together. because they're still killing people. But here's some assurances, Matt. Do you feel better? We're going to go kill some people now, and we'll give you some more assurances tomorrow. Apparently, that's all you need. I mean, it's just sad, isn't it? Because he knows that. He must know he looks stupid. Apparently, it doesn't matter. And Mick Wallace says the U.S. has been illegally dictating to sovereign countries for 100 years. Because it's the truth. So how meek and pathetic to come out and act like we don't dictate to countries except Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and every South American country. And I mean, come on. It's just insulting. Here's one of these videos that it wouldn't let me upload. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu. I just want to play the beginning of this. Here's what I think is so interesting. First of all, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met today at the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem with a bipartisan U.S. congressional delegation organized by AIPAC. You realize how fast this is May 27th. So we're at a time where the world, they're criticizing them more than ever. In the United States Congress, they're calling this out. They just called for a ceasefire that they disregarded. They're bombing in the middle of an open area they called safe. And he snaps his fingers and a bipartisan delegation comes rushing to his table of the United States government. Do you think that happens with any country anywhere? Do you think Russia can stand up and say, I call for a U.S. delegation? Do you think Britain can do that? Do you think Germany can stand up and within 3 days, he'll have a bipartisan congressional delegation around his table in their capital? Before you think about it for a second. Now, I'm not saying that they wouldn't end up dealing with these other countries, especially their allies. No other country can have a bipartisan congressional delegation within days of announcing that around his table during wartime other than Israel. Prove me wrong. Here's what he has to say. Now, what do you think they're going to talk about in this congressional delegation, seeing as how we have both Republicans and Democrats who claim to care about the fact that people are being killed in Gaza, and that the only thing the world around is truly focused on right now is stopping the slaughter, not whether or not they're going to defeat Hamas. The world doesn't care about that right now. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying their actions have caused that perception, that perspective, because, you know, after you start killing your 700th round of children, we kind of start only caring about that, you know, call me crazy. So the bottom line is you'd think he'd be talking, at least giving lip service to that. No. The only thing he cares about is how we're all going to win the war, as if that's the only thing they're there for, is probably the truth, how we're going to win the war. Not even a mention about Gaza Palestinians, not even a mention about the other people, not even a mention about even the hostages, other than a secondary point about how they'll come home when we win the war. Acting like it's the same thing when they're very much not. Just the beginning of it.
Good to see all of you. You've been longtime friends of Israel. You're great supporters. It's very important for us to maintain bipartisan support at all times, but especially in these trying times. And I want to use this opportunity of our conversation to try
Except when you call them Semites, right?
Dispel some of the things that are being said about our bipartisan alliance and the importance of maintaining it, or those who think that it's not important to maintain it. I don't know if you know this, but I think it was
all for war, too.
Ago, or 2 weeks ago, Iran officially
launched,
along with Hezbollah, a campaign which means goes to Hamas and the other H's.
This is all meant to be perceived by Western audiences.
But the formal policy is to shift from an ideological position of destroying Israel to a practical long-term plan to bring about the destruction of the state. We have to win.
Oh, interesting.
There is
so the thing that you said was about to happen is now not going to happen right away.
How do we achieve this victory? That it doesn't nullify the other needs. How to take care of Hezbollah, how to take care of Iran, how to prevent Iran
Those are the needs.
from acquiring nuclear weapons, which would make this threat 100 times bigger.
Was that
how
number
to,
4?
Prevent these militias from firing into Israel rockets from
Number 5.
Yemen or from Baghdad. Precise rockets that could reach this room right now. How do we deal with that? These are big questions, but it starts with a necessary condition, and that condition is that those who launched this genocidal attack must be defeated.
That's number 6.
And how do you do that? What we've set out at the outset with the support of President Biden and the administration, important support, which we appreciate deeply, was to say the first thing, our goal is to destroy the military and governing capabilities of Hamas in Gaza. Hamas has to be eliminated.
6 too.
Not as an idea. Nazism wasn't destroyed as an idea in World War II, but Nazis do not govern Germany. There's still neo-Nazis around, but you destroyed that organization. The second thing was to get our hostages out.
No, the Zionists
And their
overlap with them is what really happened.
Goals, because the military action is what produces the pressure to release the hostages. We've released half. We
Okay.
intend to
So it
release
took
all
about
of
a
them.
minute and 20 seconds for him to actually even get to the hostages. Meanwhile, he expressed every other dynamic about Iran and Hezbollah and everybody else who had to kill Hamas and and the hostages too, because it's the same thing. Quite the afterthought. I'm sure that makes his families back home feel really good about that, right? So this is meant to be, and there's like 7 more minutes. The point is, this is about the Western audiences. They just dutifully come to the table, allow him to set the table with all of his propaganda narratives. Here's what's happening. Here's what we need to do. Here's what they're doing over here. I'd love for someone to show me Iran, and what they're saying is that what we say is happening is what we're pointing, like the Hezbollah over here, and because Iran does it all. They make these allegations every day. And when's the last time? Like, they've been saying Iran was going to make a nuclear weapon for about 50 years or, 20 years. And what did he just say? Oh, they've shifted from their immediate plan to destroy us into a long-term plan. Or you just can't keep pretending it's 30 seconds away because you've been saying that for 20 years. It's a game. These are the bad guys. And I'm not saying that means that Iran and Russia and China are the good guys. I'm saying that what you're looking at, in my opinion, is the most obvious embodiment and example in the current stage of a villain. And that, to me, it's governments. I honestly see a very small difference between the current Zionist government and what pretty much any one of these governments would become if they were allowed to have the kind of power and influence over conversation that these governments do. But I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Either way, it's not hard to see that pretty much every serious problem right now currently ties back to what this government is trying to do. Oh, look, there's Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because she's totally not a villain, right? They're all there blindly supporting the Israeli agenda and all the lies they're spitting out in this video about everything being, it's all about some evil villain of Islam attack on all of Israel, and we all have to defend Israel. It's about defending Israel because Israel's an attack and anti-Semitism and Holocaust. That's all it is. And every one of them, they go standing at points about how we'll fight for Israel and we'll stand for you all the time. It's crazy. Of course, the only reason that ends up becoming me saying that becomes a problem is because they want to make it about me not liking Jewish people. Despite the fact of every other circumstance I'm demonstrating where I'm actually defending Jewish people against the dangerous Zionist entity. But who cares? Facts don't matter. Solomon Ahmed points out, oh, guess what? After he pushed back all that time, excuse me, I realized I made a mistake. Now, let me reschedule that delegation for our Security Council, or after the Security Council vote, which, by the way, is what happened. White House confirms Netanyahu has agreed to reschedule the delegation after canceling it because you turned your back on us. Israel admits it may not be able to destroy Hamas now that U.S. turned its back on us. So by abstaining and not vetoing the ceasefire that would actually bring your people home, that's them turning your back. No, that's them turning their back on, well, actually just meekly doing nothing, just standing in the middle and doing nothing. But the point is, the people of your supporters, the Israeli supporters, want you to take this deal. They want the ceasefire. They want the complete deal, as even 972 magazine journalists have been telling us. They're talking to the families. They're going, we want the full exchange for the full exchange that Hamas has been offering since week 1. They don't care. They lie to the Western audiences. And now he's basically already using the U.S. action that they didn't do what they wanted to say that it's their fault that we don't finish this. So now it's going to go on forever because the United States didn't support us at that one vote. Now we may not be able to do it. It's your fault. Am I crazy? And every one of these just feel childish. Not based in fact, emotional and erratic. We might not even be able to do it now because you turned your back on us. Well, aren't you the one that before this started that said you don't need anybody's help, that you could do this with the snap of your fingers because Hamas is so easy? Everything doesn't line up. If you lie about everything, you're eventually going to get caught in another lie. But guess what? When you're saying that U.S. turned their back on you, it's quite obviously the reverse, especially since you just had an immediate bipartisan delegation just rush to your side. But here's the worst example. And if you needed another reason to think that Lindsey Graham was like a feeble, weak person that tries to project strength at every turn, which is usually what weak people do, here's your best example. Just watch this video. Look at the way Netanyahu is looking at him. Even the body language. Graham is hunched and kind of like subservient to him. Now, these are my observations. I could be wrong. But, we know these things do generally hold, body language means something. Can't say we know for sure. But the way that he talks, the way that he's holding his hands, the way that Netanyahu is just looking at him going, yeah, just tell him what I told you to say. Tell me I'm wrong. Here's what it says. It's a blood libel and BS to say Israel's using starvation as a tool of war. So either that's the truth and that 90% of the world is committing blood libel, which is ridiculous, by the way, and I'll show you why, or you guys are trying to hide the fact they're starving people to death, and you're doing that from the United States, acting as a U.S. senator. But watch this video. This is crazy.
I'm here also to take on, and I will talk about this tomorrow,
Look at him. He doesn't even look away from him.
a form of blood libel in 2024. That the state of Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. That is bullshit.
Look at am I crazy? He's not even nodding. It's like Netanyahu's, it's like on a trance. He's staring right at him with this weird half smile. And Lindsey Graham is just relaying the narrative for him. Good boy. Tell him exactly what I told you.
2024. That the state of Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. That is bullshit. And I will tomorrow walk through
creepy
the food that's coming into Gaza and what you're doing to make sure that people in Gaza do not starve. So
Yeah, because he's a completely unbiased source, right? So Lindsey Graham fumbles and steps through this and probably, whatever. Lindsey Graham stumbles his way through the food aid and comes out and says, they're doing everything. Does that change the fact that every human rights group, World Food Program, Oxfam, UNICEF, United Nations, UNRWA, every human rights, Gazan people, Palestinian people, even the United States, other than Lindsey Graham, has said they're not doing enough? Have videos of them literally showing them holding the aid up, and we're going to ignore all of that because Lindsey Graham says? I guess that's a pretty, that's about the most desperate move on top of a series of desperate moves. Let's see if Lindsey Graham can convince him with his weak chin. Let's see if that works.
Israel is got its back against the wall.
He didn't like that. That is so gross, man.
Got its back against the wall. We have your back.
Ugh. I don't know. Maybe everything about that just creeps me out. It's like a hostage video, right? In any case, Lindsey Graham is wrong, or he's lying, like usual. Here's what it said underneath that video, at first, mind you. It said, blood libel is the myth that Jews sacrifice Christian kids to use their blood at Passover, not, quote, everything Israel doesn't like. And it's citing Britannica. It says Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. And it cites Human Rights Watch, the Reuters. It says Lindsey Graham has taken over 1 million from the Israeli lobby, citing open secrets. Hey, look at this. It's not there anymore. So what are we going to take by that? Right? So we're supposed to think that the community notes is a democratic process that seeks the truth, right? Not some completely Zionist bought out thing, right? Okay, well, let's pretend that's the truth. So based on that assumption, if they're telling us that blood libel is everything Israel doesn't like, and that gets checked and they remove it, which there's only one way to take that. That means the community notes deemed that to be wrong. So are you telling us, Twitter and community notes, that blood libel does mean everything Israel doesn't like? Yeah, that's pretty much what they are saying. But you can't, you can either take it one of two ways. They got rid of all of it because, we can't have them looking at the Human Rights Watch and telling them that we are starving people. So let's get rid of it. But in the process of getting rid of it, there's only one way to take that first part. That you're admitting that, yes, blood libel is, in fact, everything Israel doesn't like, because that's the opposite of what you get the point. I think that's hilarious. The reality is quite obvious. Blood libel is what they've already said about things like poisoning the wells. And then we proved with the Haaretz article that that's a real story. Haaretz proved with military documents from the IDF that they did poison Jewish Arab wells. And even to this very day, Gideon Levy wrote about the fact they'll dump animals in their wells or pour cement in them. It's common knowledge. So the classic things they point to, in fact, aren't even blood libel. The point is they use the term blood libel to about truly anything Israel disagrees with. We've seen it. So I think that's hilarious. But just make sure you understand community notes, Twitter in general, whether you think it's all or nothing, it's at the very least truly slanted in a Zionist direction. And Elon has made that abundantly clear. Now, to finish, let's just show you all the things they pretend aren't happening, right? The fact that they're totally not starving to death. Here's Dan Cohen showing you Israel. It says Israel and the U.S. are starving Palestinian babies to death. My God, that's unbelievable. Guys, this is hard to look at, okay? But we need to understand this is happening. This is a human baby in Gaza that is starving to death because they won't let food through. And as they continue to try to tell you that they're doing everything they can, every single other group in the world is telling you the opposite. There's nothing that makes this okay. God, I can't even watch it anymore. Imagine if this were the front page of New York Times or WAPO for a week straight. Imagine that. Biden would be forced to stop arms transfers to Israel. The media is complicit in genocide. There's no way around this. God damn it. A human child in 2024. Here is UNICEF continuing to tell you what he's seeing. Now, their best argument is UN is Hamas, or whatever dumb argument they make with literally nothing to back it up. How many individuals can you keep pointing out, like Albanese or Francesca or any number of them that have been there? They stood there. They watched them turn this stuff around. CNN did its own documentary showing you turning the trucks around, or holding back wheelchairs, or gauze, or anesthetic, or all the things they desperately need. It's just overwhelming. And the point is, even as it's proven, but even by corporate media desperately trying to win back some level of clout, they still let it keep going.
Yesterday, I was again in Jabalia. Tens of thousands of people crowd the streets. They make that universal signal sign as you go through the streets, again, as they stand in rubble, that universal signal of hand to mouth, desperately asking and seeking for food. Clearly, the North has massive needs for food and nutrition treatments, and they're urgent. But let's be clear. Our efforts to provide aid are being hampered. Now, there is an existing old crossing point that could be used in the North 10 minutes from where those people are putting their hands to their mouth, pleading for food. 10 minutes. Open that, and we could turn this humanitarian crisis around in a matter of days.
There's only one group stopping that. Do I even need to say who it is? Here is Al-Sal Rod saying an entire Economist article on famine in Gaza. So this is my point about they're writing about this. So at the highest levels of corporate compromise journal news, they're admitting there's a famine. They're admitting that it's happening. They're admitting it's because of the actions that are only responsible by Israel, but failing to even say the word Israel once. Doesn't even say it once. Not even when describing damage to farmland and water facilities or severely restricted aid deliveries, none of which are happening. The only thing responsible for that is Israel. Farmland, water, white phosphorus, we just showed you. Saying who is destroying the farmland and restricting aid seems like basic info to include. But they don't care. Mondoweiss writes, the ICJ has mandated additional measures against Israel in view of the worsening conditions of life faced by Palestinians in Gaza, in particular the spread of famine and starvation. This is the World Court. Israel must ensure immediate, unhindered humanitarian aid, including food, water, electricity, fuel, shelter, clothing, hygiene, medical care, UN cooperation. This also includes opening land crossings. But they're not. Israel must not carry out any military actions that infringe on Palestinians' rights under the Geneva Convention and prevent the delivery of aid. They're doing it every 10 seconds, as far as I can tell. Here's Owen Jones from The Guardian, pointing out that this is being ignored completely in much of this discussion. It's not just that Israel is deliberately restricting aid entering Gaza, as the UK Foreign Secretary himself explained in detail, but local food production has been destroyed. We already showed you this. The worst part about it, though, is it's an engineered, outlined plan. The two combined are what they're deliberately doing to create famine. And this is why they're still leaking in some this here and there, and then many times shooting them when they go for it, because they're trying to pretend. But even then, what is going through is a fraction of what should be going through even before October 7th, let alone with the famine happening. That's what these people are saying. The upwards of 500 to 1,000 trucks a day, not because that was happening before October 7th, but because they're in a famine risk right now. Which, in case you missed it, guys, it's coming directly from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPC. They've given this a level 5, the highest level, catastrophic. Not because Hamas is standing in the way, not because any other reason that Israel is stopping the aid. Everyone is clear about this. Mohammed Shihada writes, Israel's deliberate famine in Gaza visualized. At best estimate, Israel has only allowed into Gaza less than 32% of the pre-war level of goods. Now, this, again, will be directly contradicted by Elon Levy, who's just continuing to this very day to scream that they're letting in more than ever before. He's actually still making that argument. And even saying, based on UN numbers, and he's lying. He's you could prove it. I mean, I've gone over them myself. And even UN members will tell you that before it was 500 humanitarian aid trucks a day. And even then, they were food insecure. Now, you can read this if you want. Well, for time, I'm going to pass it up for now. It's a Washington Post article. They're telling you what they're doing. Damn it. I shouldn't need to make emotional points, guys. But I just know there may be somebody out there that doesn't know this and hasn't seen this and just recognizes that there's really no excuse for any of this. There's no reason this should ever be allowed in any type of society, let alone a modern, rules-based one. And it just doesn't stop. As this person writes, Israel does not want peace. They want Gaza. That's the Claudia Webb, a member of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Here's a video from Al Jazeera.
بسرعة يا عم بسرعة بسرعة.
وزن الواحد فيهم 2 كيلو بسبب سوء التغذية الحاد. المفروض يعني 8 شهور المفروض يكون وزن الواحد فيهم 8 كيلو. ما بيرضعوش لأنه فيش حليب، نشف الحليب، فيش أكل، يعني بده يرضع بده أكل، ما فيش. لا في اكل ولا شرب، حتى هناك ما فيش غير الحماد، الخبازه والحماد، بيهدول بياكلوش لا حماد ولا خبازه، وخبز ما فيش، بسكوت ما فيش. الواحد لو بده يعمل لهم بسكوت يفت لهم بسكوته، ما فيش بسكوت، ما فيش حاجه.
There's nothing for them. They can't find any food.
عاشوا فترة الحرب كلها، يعني بدل ما يعيشوا فترة أمان كل ليلة كانوا يعيشوا بقصف وخوف وجوع. وجينا هنا على الجنوب على أمل إن شاء الله ربنا هيك يفتحها علينا، يوسعها علينا، نقدر ننقذ هالأطفال.
I gotta just being honest, guys. I'm having a real hard time with this. It's just, I just don't want to admit that there's this much evil in the world. You know, it's just, how is this possible? Here is the last couple things to go over in general from Reuters. In Gaza, starving children fill hospital wards as famine looms. This was 19th of this month. The 19th. It's the 28th today. Imagine writing an article on one of the leading platforms in the world that starving children fill the hospital as famine looms, and then we seek assurances from the government, right? We raise the 9 more days. Let's see what happens. That's the kind of person we're dealing with. These are the children that are suffering. Malnourished Palestinian boy Fadi Al-Zat lies on his bed at Kamal Adwan Hospital. You know, assuming they don't bomb the hospital next, because that's happening too. Arnaud Bertrand, make sure you understand that the IPC, one of two groups that are the main groups that decide the metrics and deal out the numbers on what is a famine and not, both of which have dealt this the highest level of famine. Here's the article for you to read for yourself. But I guess Israel thinks they're Hamas, apparently, right? That must make sense. Here's Joseph Borrell Fonteles from the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Gaza's facing famine. According to the IPC, 100% of people are acutely food insecure, 70% facing famine. And here, as he points out, Levy was fired for tweeting to David Cameron, "I hope you are also aware there are no limits on the entry of food, water, medicine, and shelter, equipment into Gaza, and the fact the crossings have excess capacity." The point is, he goes, the lie was even too big for his bosses because he got fired. But Priscilla makes a good point. It wasn't that Sky Nylon's lie was too big. It was having the audacity to raise above his station, in quotes, and humiliate the former Prime Minister Cameron in his current role as Secretary of State by basically accusing him of lying and challenging him directly to the world stage, a reason as old as Britain. It's an excellent point, actually, because the point is, I like I said, I don't think they truly care about exposing that they're killing people. It's that he stood up and the wrong thing at the wrong time. But nonetheless, what did he do? He stood up and said, in contrast to Cameron saying we need more aid, he said, "I hope you're aware that there are no limits. And in fact, there's an excess." And he got fired for that. So that's him getting fired for lying about food aid. It's not because that they cared he lied about food aid, but that was the lie that got him fired because he chose to do that in contrast to somebody who was more powerful than he was, which shows you the true inner workings of our system. It has nothing to do with rights and laws. But at the end of the day, he did get fired. But here he is, yesterday, saying, yesterday Israel facilitated 258 humanitarian aid trucks, which, by the way, are not all food. 166 are food. And the point is, that is less than half of what was coming through just food before October 7th. Provably, despite him lying, saying it's more than 2.3 times the UN figure. 2.3 times? I mean, so now you're pretending it's like 60 trucks full of food, 70 trucks full of food? It's just a lie. Even the UN is telling you that's not true. And he just says otherwise. And guess what? Tags Kogat saying the same thing. So just in case you missed it, the 45 times I've done it before, Kogat is the group that is literally responsible for facilitating humanitarian aid. And they're lying about facilitating humanitarian aid, and everybody's called them out for it. I've caught them blatantly pretending a bakery that we know was destroyed was pumping out lots of bread. They're liars. They pretended markets were in place that we showed you were destroyed. These groups are all working together to not just keep a genocide going, but to pretend they're doing good. And they want praise for it. As I said, this guy is still lying about food aid, even after losing a job for lying about food aid, all while children are provably starving to death every day. This is what a true villain looks like. Here he is the same day. Israel's worked with international partners to establish field hospitals. Can you imagine the tenacity of, that's a better word than that. I mean, clearly that works because this guy's relentless, but at the end of the day, somebody who has the gall to be a part of destroying every hospital. You just raped and murdered people in Shifa Hospital, lied about what's going on, and then want praise for establishing, at least pretending to establish, who knows, 7 field hospitals. And then we're going to pretend the people that are literally starving and shooting people around them, then they're going to give them medical treatment. I'm sure we can trust Kogat, right? And then PVT points out, trust Elon. He never lies and deletes his tweets. Remember when he lied about not shooting the food convoy, which even the IDF later admitted they did? We did not shoot the convoy. We did not shoot people. Yeah, that's exactly what they then argued. We shot at people because they were looting. He deleted it because they immediately lied. Or whatever, he got caught. They're both lies. The point is, ultimately, he came out saying, we didn't do any of that. And then because they were caught by even corporate media, they said they did. He deleted it and then pretends like he doesn't lie. And then they lied too because they shot everybody. Not everybody there, but they weren't shooting at only a couple of people. They set this up. They starved them. They dropped a little bit of aid or dropped the trucks in. Now, those truck drivers that they set up, which we later proved were Israeli assets, drove them over while they were shot at. Assets meaning people they put to it. Not saying they necessarily were in the design of what was going on, but the point is these were people that had no interest in helping Palestinians, in my opinion, which is probably why they were chosen. Point is, he's a liar. And he's still lying. about hospitals and food aid while it's not even his job, because this guy's disgusting. Because it's obvious this is happening, as every human rights group in the world that matters is calling this out. Still blocking aid. And by the way, you can go back to this before October 7th, and there's conversations just like this. Here's March 24th. UN aid coordinator says Israel's still restricting relief, despite tepid improvement. That's their argument. Well, we improved a little bit. You're lying. No, you're still blocking what they need. Famine is setting in. This was today. UN court orders Israel to unblock food aid. So everyone knows it's happening, and that's their response. Hey, let's send little Elon Levy out to lie for us. Desperate. And on top of that, on top of all the crossings, all the blocked aid, all the bombing of aid that gets dropped by the air, all of which is happening, on top of that, I didn't even know this, dozens of stalled Israeli visas are now hindering the aid effort. So in every angle of this, blocking the different crossings, destroying the roads. I mean, this is a plan. And by the way, destroying their crop, the limited crops they did have. How do you not see this as a coordinated famine plan? The point is, there's all these people that are coming across that apparently they're suddenly changing the rules and claiming they don't have permission because their visas don't match up. Arbitrary. And even if you argue that this is the point is if you read this, the point is about the changing information like they do with what I'm going to show you next. But even if they didn't, the point is people are starving to death and you're making procedural issues about it. But my point is this changed just like this changed. It always has. To end, Sarah Wilkinson's pointing out, Israeli gunboats open fire on Palestinian fishing boats. So at a time when they're starving to death, at a time when they know they don't have enough food because they're making that happen, these are people trying to go out and fish and they're shooting at them, which is not new. That's my point. They would always arbitrarily change the distance, even though there's a international law of how far it's supposed to be. But as we now know and should know, they don't care about international law. They just change it every day. The Palestinians are supposed to guess. 1 mile, maybe 2. Do we risk it? If we go 1.5 miles, they're going to shoot us. They won't tell you. They won't warn you. They just murder you, even though the day before it was 4 miles. That's how this goes, because you're playing games with their lives and enjoying it. In many cases, as we can see, because they post it online. On top of that, she says, isn't this a maritime aid route now? Think about how wild that is. You're telling us this is an area where you're supposed to be allowing aid through, and now you're shooting them for getting food while you're pretending you're bringing aid for those people. Are not allowed to eat, to survive, to exist. And the bottom line right there is they're trying to fish while there's a famine. And even if you want to pretend there's not, it's clear that even you're telling us they need aid because Elon Levy is telling you they're bringing aid in. So why are you shooting at them when they're trying to feed themselves? Because it's obvious. Because all you're getting is a bunch of lies and narrative and emotional ploys and accusations of racism and then a lot of facts. I think it's pretty damn obvious. But I'm glad you're here, continuing to ask questions. Even if you disagree with what we're saying, I'm glad you're here, listening and considering what we're saying. All the links down below are always included for you to look at everything we discuss, prove it for yourself, and I hope you will. Hope you will take the time to go through everything we discussed. And I know it's a lot, but that's why I include it. So if you are really concerned about it, like my point would be simply is if you're not going to do that, then I wouldn't argue you can look at this show and then go around and say that this is the case because you're only relaying what I said. If you look and read it and learn it and understand it and prove it to yourself, then you can say, this is a fact because I went through the process. My point simply is that it's important that we all do that. Now, even myself, I don't have time to go through every single thing everywhere in the world, but that's why I don't cover every single thing. I only cover on the show what I believe I can prove, or at the very least, what I think is an important conversation around something that we're trying to prove. I just hope that that's what we're all at in this. And I really believe that. I think this community is important in this conversation today. And I think we're changing the conversation, but we're changing this field, or at least I'm trying to. And I know a lot of good people in our community, in our peripheral, and people that I even just know that we are, in contact with each other, but have completely different opinions. But at the same time, we acknowledge that we're working in a direction. not left, not right, not center, but honesty, integrity, facts, objectivity, erring on the side of those things. You know, and what's funny is even as we're saying this, people are going, oh, you know, like it's some kind of like hippy dippy kind of touchy feely. It's like, no, that's just what journalists are supposed to be. It's just exactly what it's the reality. People who actually care about objectivity, people that truly care about doing what's right, even if it may anger some people. That's where we want to be. And that's where we're going to strive for. And we will fall short for. That's just the reality of the world. But if you want to continue to support platforms like this, please find the time to, at the very least, engage with the content and share it out to people you know that you care about. And if you have the ability, support us financially, because we need your support. As always, we've got your back, so support us as well. Thank you for being here. As always, question everything, come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.